Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. This well-known quotation is from Shakespeare's play, Henry IV. Whilst many in our country are gaining an understanding into the difficulties of governance and being a leader of this country this week, you here ride the waves of what it is to be a civic leader on a daily basis. Although being a leader brings many blessings, the responsibilities can be at times overwhelming and all-consuming, particularly in our context and time. Judaism has a radical root which seeks to ensure that all of us rest as we face our own personal and professional challenges. With Shabbat, our day of rest, we are forced for 24 hours to stop, to unplug, to connect with those things and people who bring us joy and peace. Whilst having a whole 24 hours may be unrealistic for us here, we do know that finding even a moment to connect with that which brings us joy and peace can enable us to find serenity amongst the everyday stress. Before I conclude this prayer and this reflection, let us take a moment to reflect on how you find joy and peace, and if it's relevant, to ask for insight from God or whoever or whatever you believe or understand the source of insight to be. This is our prayer for this council, as it deliberates and takes action on behalf of the people of Bury. This council will have to make difficult decisions, to stretch its resources to the limit, to find a way to serve its different communities who have competing needs and desires. May you continue to be reflective decision makers, never feeling distant from the real lived experience of your constituents. May your governance bring security and settled peace to all who live in your boundaries. May you always be alive to the potential for rebirth, for change, growth and transformation, connecting to that which brings you joy and peace. And may you have the strength and energy to remain close to the vision that you began this work with. Kenya Hiratson, may this be Eternal One's will. Amen.
Please be seated. Before starting the meeting, could I ask all members to ensure that mobile phones are switched off to silent? Can I also remind everyone, and particularly members of the public present, that this meeting is being streamed as usual this evening. This means that the cameras may capture your image, and by your presence here, you are deemed to be consenting to being filmed and to the use of these images and sound recordings for webcasting. Does any member of the council wish to declare any relevant interest which he or she has in any item or issue before this council meeting?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to declare a prejudicial interest in the Conservative Group motion regarding parking in Ramsbottom, as I own a car park in Ramsbottom, I own a high street business in Ramsbottom, and I am Treasurer of the Ramsbottom Business Group, and I will leave the chamber as the debate starts.
Madam Mayor, personal interest, wife works at one of the local primary schools.
Personal interest in any items pertaining to health, Madam Mayor, as I work for the NHS.
Madam Mayor, I also work for the NHS. Personal interest relating to questions. Thank you.
Advice on the declarations of interest has been placed on each councillor's lectern. So can those members please give written notice of any interest declared on the form which is in front of each member tonight and hand it to an officer from Democratic Services. Item 2 minutes. Is it your wish that minutes of the meeting of this council held on the 28th of November 2018 be signed as a true and correct record? Item 3, mayoral communications and announcements. Firstly, I would like to congratulate all those people from Bury who have been recognised in the Queen's New Year honours, namely Rabbi Warren Elf, Susan Lomas and Kate Brown. I would like to thank all those who supported my Mayor's Ball in December, which has raised funds for my two charities, Grace's Place and the Manchester Jewish Federation, the FED. You may have read the news that Forget-Me-Not Children's Hospice have recently opened Grace's Place, which will provide high-quality care for children and their families in Bury, Oldham and Rochdale. Can I please encourage you all to support this valuable local resource as it continues to develop? The FED has begun a new partnership with the Council to provide 19 spaces for people who need additional short-term care on discharge from hospital, whilst they wait for further assessment or services. This is already greatly helping to free up beds for new patients. Now we've had 2 new toilets improved in the Town Hall, I have proposed that these toilets be twinned with a community in a developing country under a toilet twinning scheme, so that donations can pay for new toilets and for health education. More details to follow. I will be hosting a Mayor's Interfaith Breakfast in the Town Hall in March, so please contact me if you would like more information about this. Members, finally, given the significance of the motion before us tonight concerning Brexit, I have received a request for this motion to be considered as the first item of formal business. In line with Council Procedure Rules I invite Councillor Pickstone to move Standing Order 13C.
I'm happy to move that standing order, Madam Mayor.
I call on Councillor Dalbert to second.
Happy to second the motion.
Would you like to speak? Yes.
Madam Mayor, the point I would like to make is that we are Bury Council dealing with Bury matters and things that impact upon Bury residents. The Brexit issues are of supreme significance and Parliament is dealing with those within their responsibilities. But the issues identified within the other motions, such as parking within Ramsbottom and the other issues within the Labour motion, are just as important to the people in our borough, just as important to their everyday lives, I would say. And we get back to this constant argument regarding priority. I need not go over the details of this, but we are constantly reminded that questions and motions to this council should be about the workings of Bury Council, should be discussing things that are within the Bury Council's control and things that impact upon it. So I don't agree with that. I think we should take things in order as they are and things that affect our residents. And I think that there should be some consistency going forward on how both questions and motions are dealt with regarding issues which are quite clearly outside of the control of Bury Council, and that Bury Council have no decision-making powers in respect of those.
This is a valid motion and has been accepted as a valid motion. If you have a very short point to make.
The simple point is, Madam Mayor, that this Labour group will be supporting the Liberal Democrat motion to move this matter up the agenda. The motion references a hard Brexit. Analysis has been done that says Greater Manchester residents will be £2,000 worse off each. There will be a decline in the Greater Manchester economy by £10 billion. That is relevant to the people of Bury.
About the motion, there's already a motion on the agenda tonight. This is simply a request that has been made to change the order. We will still get through all the motions on the order tonight. So can I see all those in favour of this change, please? All those against?
Madam Mayor, just move a point of order 1410. As you'll be aware, and everyone else will be aware, the ex-mayor of this town, Peter Ashworth, who was a hard-working councillor in Moorside Ward, has passed away recently. And I'm just wondering, with your indulgence, Madam Mayor, if we could have a minute's silence.
Yes, happy to do that now. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like we could... Yes, let's do that now.
Okay.
And thank you, Councillor, for bringing that to my attention. Thank you. The details of the motion are set out in the summons. I call on Councillor Pickstone to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It is my pleasure to propose this important motion on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group. Madam Mayor, as you're probably aware, the deadline for motions for this council meeting was actually last year on New Year's Eve 2018. And I think when we proposed this motion, we sort of guessed this might be a fairly important week, but I didn't quite have the idea that this would be the week that the meaningful vote would take place last night and be so heavily defeated. And as we are sitting here tonight, the government is facing a vote of no confidence. So it's quite interesting to get timing so spot on for a change. Madam Mayor, there are two arguments I will put forward in support of this motion, that this council supports a people's vote on leaving the European Union. The first is that it's entirely right, now that we know what Brexit looks like, that the people, British people, give their views on this enormous decision and to give their final say on this important issue for the whole country. And secondly, Madam Mayor, that our political machinery at a national level has utterly failed and continues to fail to provide leadership on this enormously important issue for the country, and that the only way to resolve this is through a people's vote on leaving the European Union. Let me tell you what this motion is not about. It's not about whether or not we should or should not remain in the European Union. Those issues have been debated many times before and will in many places, and in fact in this council chamber we have policy on this, whereas before the referendum we very clearly made a recommendation to Bury's voters to remain in the European Union. And full transparency, I don't think anybody is surprised to learn that I voted Remain in 2016 and would do again today. And many of my neighbours voted Remain, many of my neighbours and friends voted Leave, and I'm very happy to say that, you know, even in this divided country, we all very much get on with each other. And now that the dust has settled on that referendum, and with the gift of hindsight, I think I'm even more determined in my views that the decision to leave the European Union was the wrong one. For three reasons, really, Madam Mayor. The first is that it is clear that Britain is worse off economically since the Brexit referendum decision. Jobs have been lost. The value of our currency has fallen, the prices of everyday goods for ordinary people have gone up, and ordinary people are worse off as a result of that decision. And secondly, Madam Mayor, the fact that the world is, in my view, a more dangerous place none of the concerns that we rightly had in 2016 about global warming, about extremism and terrorism needs to be tackled at an international level have gone away. But in actual fact, the world has become a more dangerous place since the election of Donald Trump as President of the USA and the involvement of the other superpower, I guess, in things like terrorism, state terrorism in our own country. And thirdly, Madam Mayor, the fact that the referendum unleashed a really unpleasant torrent of division and unpleasantness in this country, which has sometimes been quite horrible. And, you know, at worst, at least it's people being intolerant of other people's views, and at worst, it has sometimes been poisonous, racist, and occasionally violent. But these, Madam Mayor, they're my views. I am only one of 60 million adults in this country. But they are my views, and I think that those 60 million adults should be given the final say on how Brexit happened. Many people, Madam Mayor, claim to know why people voted in the referendum. I've heard people, ranging from Jeremy Corbyn to Nigel Farage, telling us for a fact why people voted to leave. Now, I don't know why anybody voted in the referendum. I know how I voted. I don't claim to know how anybody else voted. And I think it's quite arrogant when people do claim to know how people voted, why people voted. But what I can tell you as a matter of fact is that when we voted in the referendum, nobody knew what Brexit would look like. We now know what it would look like 2.5 years later. Nobody knew then what type of Brexit was on offer, whether it was hard, soft, clean, smooth, Norway, Canada, or whatever. And the one thing that did come through is that somehow everything would be fine under Brexit. Trade would be fine, the City of London would be fine, Northern Ireland would be fine, travel would be fine, retiring to Spain would be fine. British fish would sail in British waters with fins going merrily and being caught by British fishermen. But Brexit would not only be a cake-and-eat Brexit, but it would be a going back for seconds at the endless all-you-can-eat cake buffet. Now, we now know what Brexit looks like. Trade will not be the same. Pretty crucially, the great driver of our nation's wealth, the City of London, will not have access to the rest of Europe. There is no great Brexit dividend to spend on the NHS or anything else. And if we want access to European institutions, it's as a rule taker rather than a rule maker, which I think is pretty disgraceful for this great, proud nation and the fourth largest economy in the world. We now know what Brexit will look like, so it's entirely right that people are given their say on whether or not this Brexit should go ahead. Not a second referendum, but a first vote on whether or not we want the Brexit now we know what it looks like. Secondly, Madam Mayor, can I turn to the political chaos that we found ourselves experiencing in this country every time we turn on the news or open a newspaper? Theresa May likes to talk about when the history books are written. And I think my recommendation to anybody reading those history books is to skip over the chapter of the last few years unless they want nightmares. Or perhaps it will be a recommended text to students who are studying how not to run a country, or how a great country can make itself into a less great one. And Madam Mayor, the failure of the political system to deal with these issues began the morning after the referendum result, when the Prime Minister who got us into this mess resigned and washed his hands of the entire thing. That's when the failure of the political system began. And ever since then, we've had a Prime Minister who has singularly failed to deliver a Brexit that any group of people could possibly agree to. Never mind Parliament and never mind her own party. And what she has come back with isn't even a deal on a future relationship. It's like agreeing to move out of your house without knowing where you are moving to, and in fact paying over £37 billion, and in fact giving your former housemates a legally binding say in how you lead your life in the future. It's a very, very bad deal, and I think everybody agrees that it's a bad deal. What is clear is that the Prime Minister doesn't have the support of Parliament for this deal. She doesn't even seem to have the support of her party and has had to go through the humiliation of a leadership challenge at this crucial time. And the country is at the behest of some tiny political minorities that have no accountability to anybody whatsoever, such as the European Research Group of Conservative MPs. And I, for one, Madam Mayor, am not prepared to just sit here while these tiny minorities that don't represent anybody have a sway over the future of the country. I also believe, Madam Mayor, that we need to look at Her Majesty's loyal opposition and its failure to provide leadership on this issue. Indeed, it has provided leadership last night in calling a vote of no confidence to the government, but that's a little bit like trying to rescue Cinderella at 1 minute to midnight, Madam Mayor. Jeremy Corbyn has failed all the way through this process to show any leadership, which the Leader of the Opposition should do. I'm not going to taint the whole of the Labour Party with the same brush. I'm very glad that 70 Labour parliamentarians today came out in support of a people's vote on leaving the European Union, which is very welcome, and I know many, many other Labour Party members are as frustrated as many others that the Westminster leadership of the Labour Party has not been providing leadership on this issue. If anything, the Liberal Democrats are very often accused of sitting on the fence, but on this hugely important issue, it is actually the Labour Party that's sitting on the fence and failing to come forward when Britain actually needs leadership on this important issue. And what makes this worse, Madam Mayor, is that the worst possible outcome, which is crashing out of the European Union on the 29th of March with no deal whatsoever, all the more likely.
You have 1 minute left, Councillor.
Absolutely. So, Madam Mayor, we have an opportunity tonight, I guess, to make headlines. Over 30 local councils have already added their name to supporting a people's vote on Brexit, but we can become the first local council in Britain to do that after last night's meaningful vote. We do need to give people the final say on Brexit, and we need to use a referendum to provide us a way out of the political stalemate that is paralysing the country. And I recommend this motion to this council chamber. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pickstone. I call on Councillor Dalbert to second the motion.
Madam Mayor, I can speak now, if that's okay with you. I fully endorse everything Councillor Pickstone said. On the morning after the referendum in 2016, I actually felt I was in shock and disappointed, but accepted that the people of the country had made the decision they did. Yet this evening, I feel angry. How could we have got ourselves into this mess 2.5 years on? If the people had known at least some of the true facts and still voted to leave, I would have fully accepted their decision. In my opinion, the people were misled and in some cases, I believe, lied to. And who did this? Well, actually, I believe it was some sitting MPs, and not only MPs, in some cases, ministers of the government. The bus that said an extra £350 million per week if the NHS were to leave. The idea that immigration would cease immediately. The idea that Turkey would join the EU and we would not be able to stop their citizens coming to the UK, so we needed to leave. The idea that the EU would not let us leave without a good deal, as it would hurt them. We also had possible Russian interference and what was described as dodgy advertising from a third party on Facebook. Then there was the Jeremy Corbyn factor. Critics have said his lukewarm support for the EU, which he summed up as 7 out of 10 in one appearance, filtered through to the entire campaign. But he is a Eurosceptic, although it's thought that almost 90% of the MPs are not, of his MPs. If anybody made any sensible comments about life after leaving the EU, they were classed as using Project Fear. There were also serious concerns about the Leave campaign, that they broke the law as they massively overspent in the campaign. And what's happened since the referendum? Well, apart from last night's massive defeat, MPs have voted to allow Parliament to seize control of Brexit. In other words, if the government opted for a no-deal exit, MPs would now have the power to oppose it. So it's not even in her hands anymore. And this is what you call a mess. The Prime Minister has said she will speak to MPs after last night's vote to try to come to some kind of consensus. But why now? After all this time, why leave it so late? A motion of no confidence has been tabled today and is being debated in Parliament. Assuming that fails, what kind of deal will the MPs come up with? Well, we don't know, and I don't think they know, as MPs that voted against the deal have many different reasons for voting against it. The main opposition in Parliament are jumping up and down for a general election, with no care for what happens to the country and its citizens. All a general election will do is send the country into more turmoil. Labour's approach amounts to more than a power-grabbing tactic. Are we supposed to just leave it to Jeremy and everything will be fine? If Labour wins the general election, do we think that Jeremy will pop over to the EU? They will give him exactly what he wants and will leave the EU on the 29th of March and everybody will be happy? I don't think so. This will not wash with the British public. I mean, what could go wrong? The people are losing confidence in Parliament, and this is bad for democracy, it's bad for the country, and it's terrible for the next generation. I will not pretend that going back to the people and asking them to vote on a deal will solve everything. Some divisions, unfortunately, will still exist.
You have 1 minute, Councillor.
But people will be voting with a better understanding of what it means for this country to leave the EU. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any comments? Councillor Walker, Councillor Quinn, Councillor Silviger.
Is this 5 minutes? Yeah. It's a big subject for 5 minutes. I say that because of the public interest that was referred to, so they know you don't have long to develop your points here. First thing I'd say is the council's got it wrong before, and you're going to get it wrong again tonight. I remember on the first referendum, Labour all voted to say Bury wished to stay in the EU. That was the official line from Bury, like Tim's trying to put forward with Rishi tonight. And you were completely wrong. Bury voted to leave, as most of the country did. We've had a line about how bad this country is now we've voted to leave. Well, Macron in France is fighting against people who want to leave in France, but they're in a bit of a mess at the moment, and they're in the EU. Merkel in Germany is having a terrible time. She lost the last election, and she'll be going soon, and they're still in the EU. Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and so on and so on. Poland, they're all having a bad time in the EU. So this idea that we are terrible even before we've even left. Tim Pickstone said, we now know what Brexit will be like. Well, he's better than I am because I don't know what it'll be like, even though I vote to leave. I think we've got to find that out, and there may be difficult days initially, but it attracts me to be an independent country with our own sovereignty, ruling our own country, developing our own trade agreements, and so on and so on. I won't go through the whole thing. But 9.3 million was paid by the government at that time on a taxpayer-funded pamphlet on the dangers of Brexit. And there was a cabinet row of the use of this money for pro-EU propaganda, but still the people voted the way they do. And we've got to deliver what the people voted for. Those who thought the first referendum was divisive, that seems to be the word nowadays, though general elections are divisive, but we have them. Democracy is divisive, but it's become the common word, hasn't it? If you go for a second referendum, I can only say you haven't seen nothing yet. I think I'm not threatening violence, I'm meaning the division and the feelings of being let down by working class people like me will be really something to note, I think, from the establishment, middle class, upper class establishment in London, Oxford and so on. So I'm just warning you of that. If you can have a second referendum, when we haven't yet enacted to vote in the vote of the first referendum, I'm not quite sure what you're voting on. We haven't actually enacted the first referendum, and you want a second one. Could make jokes about, football matches, and if you're losing and it's nearly full time, start the match again and see if we can get a better result. In the last general election, 80% plus of votes were for Labour and Conservative, who favoured leaving the EU. The Liberals, I'm sorry to remind you of this, but 7% voted Liberal, and people could have voted for the Liberals stay in the EU, because that's what you want, really. You don't want a second referendum, really. You want to stay in the EU. And I wish you'd be honest about that. The idea of delivering leaflets and canvassing, going around about a second referendum is off-putting to me, I'll be honest. But we'll fight you if you make us vote again. And I think the people going to leave, who've seen what's happened with the EU in the last 2 years, there'll be a bigger majority for leaving, I would predict. The people's vote was in 2016. People decided to leave the EU.
Councillor, you have 1 minute left.
Oh, let's see what I mean. Plans for a European state, European foreign policy, European currency, European flag, anthem and army. People don't want that in this country. To say the Liberals do that we need a second referendum as a people's vote, those who voted last time were not real people. I voted last time, many here did, and we are people. So it's a bit of an insult to say we need a second referendum so people can vote. Even more, the suggestion that OAPs like myself who voted leave should be ignored because they're old. This is a new one. They're talking about race and religion and gender and everything, and now because you're old, we should discount your vote. In the debate 2 years ago, I heard young university students of voting age say on TV they would vote to remain because they wish to travel in Europe. Before we joined the EU, I travelled all over Europe, stayed in French and German families. I'm not anti-European, I'm not anti-French, I'm Francophilic. I love Spain, I love Eastern Europe.
Councillor, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, I wish I was in Parliament and you got half an hour more.
Councillor Quinn.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, Brexit was never about this country. It was about the future of the Conservative Party. An arrogant chancer of a Prime Minister worried about the defection of Conservative MPs to UKIP announced a referendum to clear the air. The Tory Party had taken us into Europe, deepened our ties into Europe, created the Single European Act, but had been at civil war over Europe for 40 years. Another chancer and Bullingdon Club member wrote 2 scripts about Brexit. One to remain, one to leave. Which one he used depended on what he thought was the best chance of him personally becoming the next Conservative Party leader. This is a man who since has said business and now knows more about car making than the head of Jaguar Land Rover. What people were promised by the likes of Johnson, Fox, Gove and Farage was a golden future where future trade deals promised would be the easiest thing in human history to sign, where we'd have a Brexit dividend to spend on the NHS, we would all be better off, and where the world queued up to do business with Britain. 2.5 years gone, no trade deal. The tactics used by UKIP were a disgrace. They lied about Turkey being admitted to the EU, and the post and tax that they used were partly responsible for unleashing a wave of intolerance and prejudice. Madam Mayor, it's a fact that hate crime has increased post-Brexit. And, Madam Mayor, nobody voted to be poorer. The reality of the result of the referendum was that pounders fell by 15%. Companies are starting to shed jobs. There's a loss of confidence in the UK. The chance of the breakup of the union has increased. And the future of the Good Friday peace process is in doubt, threatening a return to the days of the Troubles and the likes of 2-ton bombs going off in Manchester. Airbus UK, Jaguar Land Rover, BMW, Rolls-Royce, Vodafone, Deutsche Bank, the British Chamber of Commerce, CBI, Employers Federation, Institute of Directors, Federation of Small Businesses, amongst others, that have warned against a hard Brexit, which the right of the Tory party is desperate for. The Japanese, who invested £43 billion in this country, and probably one of Maggie Thatcher's, what she will say, greatest achievements, attracting this into Sunderland, many of them have said, post-Brexit, if the conditions do not suit them, they will relocate. We have already lost the European Medicines Agency. We will lose Euratom. We will lose the European GPS system, Galileo, which Britain has partly funded and has pioneered. We have lost at least 20,000 jobs, and we will lose more if the insanity of a hard Brexit goes ahead. Madam Mayor, this country has lost its respect, its dignity, its influence and its self-confidence. We have shipping contracts handed out to companies with no ships. We have the NHS buying 5,000 fridges to stockpile medicines, including 99% of insulin, which comes from abroad. We have practice runs of 200 lorries on an abandoned airfield in Kent, trying to prepare for the traffic chaos of a no-deal Brexit, where in a day, 10,000 lorries use the port of Dover. Many of these lorries, Madam Mayor, bring in the supplies for the just-in-time assembly lines that many of our factories depend on. Gibraltar used as a bargaining chip by Theresa May. Madam Mayor, we have become an international laughingstock. This devious, disingenuous charlatan of a Prime Minister was forced to have the meaningful vote in Parliament by the courts. So much for taking back control. She then delayed the vote at Christmas, trying to run down the clock to March the 29th. She was humiliated on Tuesday night, the worst defeat in the history of a Prime Minister whose government was also found to be in contempt of Parliament. Theresa May was an incompetent Home Secretary. She's an incompetent Prime Minister. She has lost the confidence at least one-third
You
of
have
her own
1 minute
party.
left,
That's
Councillor.
all I need. She has, however, just won the vote of confidence. She's kept in power by the DUP and no doubt by at least £2 billion worth of funding for Northern Ireland. But, Madam Mayor, Parliament remains deadlocked. In my view, the only way forward is to put the issue back to the people. We know a lot more now, as Councillor Pickstone has said, than within 2016. The Labour conference in September calls for a people vote if there was no chance of a general election. That should be honoured by the leadership of the Labour Party. There should be a people's vote, possibly with 3 options. 1, to give the chance to go out on a hard Brexit on WTO rules. 1, to remain, and the other to extend Article 50 with the hope of getting a trade deal to keep us as far as close to the EU as possible. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Silberger.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. After that diatribe of doom and gloom, I think we're all shaking our boots. We all agree, yes, second referendum. What a load of nonsense. But firstly, let me echo my group leader's comments that I think it's a right waste of time what we're debating here. It's not going to have any bearing, it's not going to change anything. And too many members in this chamber seem to think they're in Westminster. Perhaps they might wish they were, but they're not, and we should be debating issues that affect this borough. But I turn to the Liberal group and I purposely omit the word Democrat because, frankly, I think they've given up their right to use the word Democrat. They perhaps either call themselves the Liberal European Party or, better still, the Liberal Undemocratic Party. But Councillor Pickstone says that this second referendum, people's vote, is not about rerunning it, about remain or leave. Now, I perhaps half believe you if anyone could answer the 2 basic questions. The first one is what the question would be in a second referendum, and the second one is what happens if it's a leave result again. Then do we leave back to square one? Do we leave in hard? Is that WTO hard Brexit, or is it same as where we were? And if it's a remain result next time round, then I think you'll agree that it's not going to be a 75, 50, 25 result. It's going to be a close result again either way. And then what happens to the leavers then? Is it best of 3? So I've not heard a single coherent answer. Not from the Liberal group here, not from Vince Cable or anybody else. And therefore, I must conclude that it is all about just reversing the result, and you made it very clear you'd like to remain, and I therefore vehemently oppose this motion. I think it's anti-democratic and it cannot be allowed to happen. Thank you.
Councillor Tariq.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As has been said, the country is clearly at this stage more divided and fearful than it ever has been in the past. We've seen before our eyes 2 years of failed negotiations, and the verdict on the failed Brexit deal was absolutely decisive and a historic defeat for a government that's never taken place in Parliament with such a huge number. The principle that the Tory party has been trying to run with is of delay and denial, and they have reached the end of the line. Issues around the backstop agreement have caused them significant heartache, and at the same time, that is what's going to have an impact on the future trade deals. In terms of the significant date of 29th of March 2019, we now, Madam Mayor, move closer to the prospect of leaving the European Union with a no deal. And what is the impact going to be on our constituents, on our borough, on our region of Greater Manchester. There's been some comment around the impact, whether this issue does affect our communities and our residents, and I say it does, Madam Mayor, because any no-deal scenario will have an impact on issues such as passport renewal, driving licences, mobile phone packages, as well as other things. Not to mention the significant impact on businesses, and the government has already issued more than 100 technical notices explaining the practical effects of a no-deal scenario. And also, Madam Mayor, under a no-deal, Bank of England have also estimated unemployment will almost double to 7.5%, and the house prices will rise by, prices will surge by 6.5% a year, and a pound could drop by 25%. And in terms of the local impact on our economy, within the North West, economic growth could slump by 12%, and the cost to the Greater Manchester economy specifically could be around £7 billion a year in the event of a hard Brexit. What we've seen in the last 2 years, Madam Mayor, in terms of unemployment within Greater Manchester, that it has risen 24% amongst over 50s and 15% across all age ranges. And Councillor Walker mentioned public opinion and what would happen in the event of a second referendum. But the public has delivered its verdict over various means over the last couple of months, and it seems that even Leave voters are critical of the government, and 70% of them feel that the government is doing a very bad job at handling negotiations. Madam Mayor, I think it's important tonight to pay tribute to somebody who fought very hard to challenge the government, and it's because of this individual's heroic efforts and the heartache that she's had to suffer since that we are getting a say in Parliament through our Members of Parliament, and that is Gina Miller, who's championed this cause, and it's because of her that we're actually at the point we're at, where the Prime Minister and the government are being held to account for their actions.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
This will be the last speaker at this
Thank you,
point.
Madam Mayor. Just one thing. I'm just wondering, I've listened to these speeches, quite a strong speech from Councillor Quinn. I've forgotten his name, forgive me, a senior moment. Maybe I'm living in a different world, because when I knock on doors, and we all do, nobody mentions Brexit. In fact, if it is mentioned, this is my experience. I mean, we may be knocking on different doors, and people sort of, if it is brought up, is just get on with it. And if you bring in another referendum, you've got the issue of what is it going to say on it? Is it going to give all the details of the deal? Because, quite honestly, people wouldn't understand it. And I would not like to think we are going to have a second referendum, because it would be, in my opinion, it would be extremely difficult to sell to residents that they would say, we've already voted once, you're the professionals, get on with it, because the general public are living their life. We are all very, very involved in politics. But this is my experience. I can't say man in the street, I'm not allowed to say this. The person in the street is interested in getting on with their own lives. Let the politicians get on with it, and are completely switched off. So definitely a referendum, another referendum, would not be something I would like to be knocking on doors or canvassing on behalf of. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm aware that there is an amendment on the table tonight, so I propose to move to the amendment now. Can I have a proposer for the amendment, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In simple terms, what this amendment seeks to do is to take a more nuanced position than that proposed by the Liberal Democrats. It is right to say that we did undertake the biggest single democratic exercise in this country's history. And whether you like it or not, and I was a Remainer, people voted to leave the European Union. And they entrusted, via the mechanisms that have been discussed, the government and via the government parliament to put forward a proposition detailing Britain's exit from the European Union. But now we are at a stage where Parliament, and certainly the government, cannot fulfil that responsibility. Yes, the government has won the vote of no confidence today, but yesterday it suffered the biggest defeat of any ruling government in over 200 years of parliamentary history. That isn't something that we can just brush over. We can't brush over the fact that the arithmetic will not allow this government to pass any Brexit deal, when almost a third of the Conservative Parliamentary Party are in open rebellion. Councillor Pickstone makes a really good point. The interests of the United Kingdom should not be conflated with the narrow interests of the Conservatives, and even more narrow interests of the DUP. There is no possibility now that this impasse can be broken in Parliament. And that's why we're calling for a general election. I note Councillor Dalbert's point about having a general election and the uncertainty that would cause. But it would take almost 7 months to have a second referendum at this stage if it were to be called. We have no certainty as to what the question would be. It would take a matter of weeks to put a general election in place. And now the Conservatives called a general election in 2017, 3 years before they had to do so. If they believe they are doing a good job generally and making a great job of these negotiations, then test it with the British people in a very quick period of time. As a Labour Party, as a Labour group, we accept that a no-deal Brexit would be a disaster for this country. And to make the point, what's this got to do for Bury residents, or what does it have to do with us? The most recent analysis undertaken by the Greater Manchester Combined Authority says that the Greater Manchester economy would decrease in terms of almost £8.6 billion, which is £2,300 for every resident in this conurbation. Greater Manchester itself exports 50% of its goods and services to the European Union, which is far higher than the British average. We shouldn't let the debate around the future of the European Union, quite frankly, to be left in the hands of right-wing Conservatives or right-wing politicians who, quite frankly, have nothing to lose. Jacob Rees-Mogg does not need to worry about the impact of a hard Brexit or a no-deal Brexit. His job isn't on the line, his home isn't on the line, and the future of his family is not on the line. But whilst we accept the arguments around a second referendum, at this stage it is the wrong time because they are inherently circular. Parliament gave the power to the people to decide our future on Europe. The people have spoken. Parliament can't agree, frustrating the will of the people. And so the solution,
one minute,
and so the solution, we're saying, is to go back to the people. Although I don't agree with much that Councillor Silbigger said, and perhaps he should work on his joke writing. But what happens if the outcome of a second referendum is to leave again? It doesn't make any sense at this time. It should be the option of last resort, but we are not there yet. Finally, Madam Mayor, we can't go on like this. We can't continue with the uncertainty for business, the uncertainty for our public services, the uncertainty for our NHS. And all the meantime we waste on Brexit, we're not dealing with what really matters: child poverty, the north-south divide, the fact that so many people in this country live in work poverty as it stands, that we should not be making it worse, the ongoing impacts of austerity. We need a change in government, Madam Mayor, to make a difference, and we need that change now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shorey. Do I have a seconder for this amendment?
Second the amendment and reserve my right to speak, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, there is no political question that could ever be asked where the answer is Jeremy Corbyn. Councillor, there have been a number of comments here regarding the impact of Brexit and some various views put forward. But my God, do we all have to be terrified by a Jeremy Corbyn government? That Councillor Shorey would prefer an unreconstructed communist to run this country in these circumstances is literally beyond belief. If, as a council, we want high taxes, so local businesses, we have record start-ups in this borough over the last 12 months, if we want those to be taxed out of existence, if we don't want any controls upon immigration, if we don't want an immigration system that works for all, if we don't want economic growth, if we want a man who has been the friend of terrorists for many, many years, and we laugh from up there, but that's what this is what the party opposite would prefer. And when I look at what it's very unfashionable in this place, as the audience members have probably noticed, to talk about Bury, because normally we just get to listen to long speeches, normally in sixth form common rooms, which talk about general political principles. But let's talk about what somebody said about Jeremy Corbyn. You and Seamus Milne do not believe in the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their own right. So for me, within this borough, there is a large Jewish population. Comments such as that cause real concern for me regarding motions that are put forward. Your long-standing preferences are for the values of Putin's Russia and the Islamist fundamentalism of Iran. It is no wonder that so many British people are uncomfortable at the prospect of you becoming Prime Minister. Now, which right-wing fanatic said that? The Member of Parliament for Bury South said that. Long-serving Labour member. He has articulated what the vast majority in these people are, what the vast majority of people in this country are scared of. More than Brexit, more than any other political problem you can put forward, the truly terrifying prospect of Corbyn and MacDonald running anything will destroy this council's finances, will destroy jobs, will destroy opportunity, and would be an utter disaster. And my final point is this. This debate allegedly is about democracy. I agree wholeheartedly with what my colleague has said. Can I put forward a proposal, Madam Mayor?
Can you please address the amendment, which you understand you're speaking
Listen,
on?
Madam Mayor, I appreciate you want to control me, but nobody else in the chamber. But
I will control anyone. Will control anyone who says they're speaking on an amendment and then asked to put forward a proposal. Yes.
Speaking on the amendment, Madam Mayor, and we're talking, it was mentioned regarding the Speaker, Councillor Shaw, regarding the economic impacts. Well, I have a view upon a governing party and the impact they have on Bury. And so can I ask this, Madam Mayor? It is impossible to get a more incompetent Labour group that run Bury Council. This Labour Council do nothing in respect of creating jobs, nothing in respect of regeneration, nothing in respect of fixing potholes, nothing to improve the lives of our residents. So following on from this logic, which I'm sure Councillor Pickstone will support, can we please have a second referendum on the last local election results last May? And if the people in this borough...
Can I please ask for respect for the Speaker?
Have the misfortune to have the Labour Party in power after next May's elections, can we please have another election after that until the right decision is made? Because I can tell the people in this borough, you cannot get more incompetent than the people who are across from me. They are destroying the finances of your borough. And if that's an important issue, let's continue to have elections until we get somebody who can run this council in a faintly competent manner.
You have one. Right, you're going to...
Madam Mayor, I just want to make a very brief point. You know, we've got members of the public here. We've been live streamed. The Labour's having a go at the Conservatives. The Conservatives having a go at the Labour Party. The Liberals, we're all having a go at each other. You know, and this epitomises what the situation is in Parliament. But just for a couple of seconds, Madam Mayor, could we look at what the real issue is? The issue in this country is about the people of this country. Let's just focus on that just for a couple of minutes. And that is that even as Councillor Shorey says, if we had another general election, and even if, for God's sake, even if the Labour Party won and they had another referendum and the country decided to even remain within the EU, have we thought about one thing, and that is that if we were in the EU, one country in the EU, and if that EU decided to move towards a federalist Europe, where that federalist Europe wants one military, it wants one currency, it wants one parliament, it wants one of everything, one bank, one of everything. You know, what would we, as
as people, or the generations of our forefathers who fought for this country. Like my great-grandfather, who was in the British Indian Army, my great-grandfather and my grandfather who fought in the British Indian Army and the British Indian Navy for our freedom, for our sovereignty, for us to just allow it to be diluted within an ever closer social union of Europeans? Or do we want to have our own freedom, our own sovereignty, our own royal family, our own currency, our own say? You know, Britain has always fought above its weight. Why is it that we are putting ourselves down and fighting with each other rather than saying that we can achieve what we set out to achieve, rather than fighting with each other? Madam Mayor, a federalist Europe is going to be dangerous for every single religious minority in this country. And I belong to a religious minority in this country, and I personally would not want a federalist Europe. And that is what exactly is going to happen if we don't have some consensus between Labour and Conservatives and the Liberals. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Right. I think these will be two final speakers on the amendment. So Councillor James, then Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll try and be short. The last few weeks have shown the utter shambles and chaos of what has been going on with this government. It's been summed up, I think, in a sense, by Mark Francois, I think is his pronunciation, MP from the ERG group, who, together with his colleagues, stabbed his leader, Theresa May, in the back yesterday. And then today he said that he's a Tory first and last when he then supported her. Well, that's the issue. Who do we support? I'm a citizen first and last, not Tory, not Labour. Mark Francois is quite capable of deciding that he's going to put his party before everybody else and before this country. Madam Mayor, a group of rich, selfish people for whom Brexit seems to be just self-interest cannot hold this country to ransom forever. What we need is a new vote, an election at the very least. And why not? What is it that the government and the Conservatives are afraid of? What is it that the DUP are afraid of? Are they worried about being held to account by the electorate? Are they worried about being kicked out? What is so undemocratic about voting, about having an election? Why is that undemocratic? Surely that's the most democratic thing we can do. Even Rees-Mogg said back in 2011, I think, that we could always have a second referendum. Well, there you go. The Conservatives chanced their arm recently, or the last couple of years ago, when they tried a further election. They lost because they lost seats and they lost their majority. What are they afraid of? Margaret Thatcher summed it up. They're frit. I will support the amendment, Madam Mayor.
Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Liberal Democrat motion tonight does nothing more but go against the voices of our borough.
Can I ask you to speak on the amendment?
Yeah,
this debate is on the amendment, not the motion.
It's been so the amendment, well, it covers it both in some respects, but I'm quite happy that we now have the Labour Brexit policy, because it's a shame that Jeremy Corbyn has been incapable of telling anybody that today. So well done, Councillor Shorey. Hopefully you'll make it to Westminster one day. I'm sure you won't, but good luck. One thing I'd like to say, we've heard a lot about democracy and the importance of a vote. And the last election, you are quite right, Bury South returned a Labour MP. And tonight, I'm very proud to say Ivan Lewis is my MP, because he supported this government. He abstained. Although he voted against last night, tonight he abstained in the confidence vote. Why? Because he feared Jeremy Corbyn being in power. So it's quite clear, although this amendment calls for a general election, there's enough people in the Labour Party that are against that. Ivan Lewis for 1. The result was 325 to 306. But I'm most intrigued in the sense that the leader of this Labour Party in Bury is Ivan Lewis's senior political assistant. So clearly there are odds here, and I've checked, that was today, declaration of interest. So, Madam Mayor, I won't be supporting any of amendments or this particular motion because in 2016, the referendum on Britain's relationship with the EU was the largest democratic exercise this country had ever undertaken. Bury was the first council in the whole of Greater Manchester to declare its result, which was 71.3% in terms of turnout. That is far higher than the 2015 general election and that of the 2017. So when you talk about elections, this is an election which, in my view, should be upheld. But then again, we have a long history of the EU of rerunning referendums. There was a Maastricht Treaty where Denmark voted against it, but no, it had to be rerun to get the right result. Then there was the Nice Treaty. Ireland voted against that, but it had to be rerun. France and Holland both voted against the EU constitution. Then there was the Lisbon Treaty where Ireland voted against that as well. And then finally there was the Greece bailout, where Greece themselves voted against that bailout. But naturally the EU only likes votes where they go in their favour. So, Madam Mayor, as I said, I will not be supporting this amendment. And it's clear that the Prime Minister wants to get on with the job. She said tonight in the House that she's going to meet opposition leaders to ensure that the House keeps the confidence of the British people and get on with the job. Yet Jeremy Corbyn has already ruled that out. So we've heard great speeches, some may say, tonight on how Labour would fix Brexit, but the very leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition is incapable of meeting with the Prime Minister to get it sorted. So, Rishi, I wish you the very best of luck in terms of being an MP, because maybe that's where you should be.
Councillor Shorey, Councillor Shorey, please. Thank you. Sorry. I'm not allowed. Can I ask Councillor... Which standing order?
And I've asked advice for the number of the standing order, but this is wrong, this amendment. It says the current Conservative government will no longer enjoy the confidence of Parliament. So that's wrong, so I don't know whether we should amend their own motion. Their own amendment. But it's not correct.
Madam Mayor, that was put in the figurative basis rather than the literal, because in my view, when a government puts forward a policy and it gets beaten by a biggest majority in the history of Parliament ever, I don't think they really enjoy the confidence of Parliament or the House.
All our debates not based on figures saying audit committee, but just what we think.
Okay, I think we're all aware that this is a very contemporary motion. Councillor O'Brien, I call on you. You reserved your right to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With any topic like this, it's a danger going last, but I'm pretty sure we could talk about this all evening. So I'll try and be brief, Madam Mayor. We've heard already how having another vote would be undemocratic, and I think it's been quite rightly derided that voting can't really be undemocratic. And in fact, the proposals to, I think seemingly the proposals to cancel local elections every year, or every 3 out of 4 years, seems to have been proposed by the side opposite. Well, if that's how they want to play it, then we can play it like that. People have decided since 2011 to keep a Labour administration in Bury, and that is democracy. It didn't during the years preceding that for some time. That too is democracy. We should not fear democracy. We should not fear what people expressing their opinion on a matter. What we should fear, however, is putting heads in the sand when we are clearly facing one of the biggest disasters our country has ever faced. That is a no-deal Brexit. There is potentially a Brexit deal out there that could keep large parts of the country united. It could protect trade. It could protect the customs union. It could protect our relationship with our biggest trading partner. But it would probably come at the cost of other things as well. Perhaps our say in rules and how we participate in very important regulations in global negotiations. There is always a balance to any future relationship outside of the European Union. There could be good things, there could be bad things. The reality is, if we ignore the fact that the people will happily want to have a say on this, because it is clearly going to affect their lives, we should not fear either a general election or indeed, if we can't get a general election, going back to the people. And that's why I think Labour's position on this does respect the result of the referendum first and foremost, but it also makes the point you cannot continue with a government indefinitely that is clearly not living up to what it was there to deliver. It has not delivered Brexit. It can't deliver Brexit. And it will only ever deliver a no-deal Brexit, which clearly it would be a disaster. And I don't really think there's even much debate on that issue. So there are a range of issues to this. We've talked about Theresa May trying to create a consensus. I don't believe it. And I don't believe it because I've seen by her example, not spoke to the trade unions for 2 years on perhaps one of the biggest issues facing jobs and people's employment and living standards in this country, not talking to opposition party members, some of whom are actually potential allies in a Brexit deal, but she refused to do so, pandering to the far right with rhetoric and pandering to extremists on the streets with attacks on people who simply want to give the people a say on this important issue. I don't believe she is there to create a consensus in the country or in Parliament. So it's absolutely right that we tell this government to go back to the people, either in a general election or indeed, failing that, in a deal, with any deal or even no deal. And I would very simply say a no-deal Brexit or Remain could be a very simple way of having a second referendum, but that is not for me to say. It is not beyond the wit of man to come up with a question for that. But ultimately, this does affect the Council's future as well. It is not irrelevant to Bury at all.
One minute.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We are meant to be self-sufficient going forward on business rates and council tax. Well, if we have a disastrous Brexit, which is a possibility, we could lose businesses. In fact, we will lose businesses. That is the reality of it. Absolutely undermining the future stability of our council. And whatever the fear of Corbyn is on the opponent's side, well, it's actually the Labour Party that will fund local government adequately. It will fund social care, it will fund the NHS, and it will fund local councils. That's not something to fear, that is something to welcome, and it will only come with a general election. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Can I ask the mover of the amendment, to, you have a right to reply. If you can be brief, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will be brief. Well, Councillor Daly, you sound like a beaten man. It's as if we have a general election, we will have Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. So, you can't have him a general election forever. And it's a point that was made earlier by my good friend Nick, that Theresa May is seeking to get public confidence in the House. The problem is, the problem is, I didn't actually hear what you said. I was too thinking about the clever thing I was going to say. What did you say? Sorry.
Do you want Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister?
I'd have Jeremy Corbyn over Theresa May at any time, because she's doing such a fantastic job. Yeah. But the question I'd ask you, do you want Theresa May as Prime Minister? Do you back the deal? Do you back the deal, Councillor Daly? Do you back the deal? No. There you go. So what you've got is Bury Conservatives. They don't want a second referendum because they think it's undemocratic. They don't want a general election because they think it's undemocratic. Do you want a dictatorship? Is that more democratic? Is that what we have now? Is that what we have now? Oh, we haven't, but yeah. Is that what we have now? You said...
Can we have some order, please?
My good friend Nick said Theresa May is trying to reach out to other parties to try and get public confidence back in the House. But the House doesn't have any confidence in her. A majority of over 200 voted against her Brexit deal.
the Liberal Democrats are correct. We need to break the impasse. We need to break the impasse, and we need to break it now. That can only be done in the shortest possible time with a general election, not a second referendum at this stage. And I'll make a final point, and I think it's quite an important one. You referenced my good friend Ivan Lewis. Just remember one thing. Ivan Lewis was elected 5 times as the Labour Member of Parliament for Bury South, not Ivan Lewis in his own regard. And that should never be forgotten, and I'm sure he won't forget it either. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Can I? No, I'm sorry. We have a lot.
Mentioned repeatedly in a speech. Do I not have the right to reply to that?
Well,
have some advice on
I think personal comments were made about the leader before, who he hasn't replied to. So I think we have to leave it. I'm chairing this meeting. I'm trying to stick to the timing. We have an amendment. Can I see? I proceed to vote on the amendment. Oh, sorry. I'm advised that this is when we, first of all, we have the mover of the original motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I'd just like to thank members for their contribution in this debate, and I'm not going to respond to some of the comments as they don't really deserve response. We will be voting against this Labour amendment. I almost agree with every word that the Labour members of this council chamber who have spoken in this debate have said, but I don't agree with your conclusion. Which is that we should have a general election to resolve the stalemate that we have over Brexit. I mean, absolutely, we have no confidence in this current Conservative and DUP government. I don't let that not be in doubt, and I very much wish we had a different government tomorrow. But the facts are that about 45 minutes ago, Jeremy Corbyn's one attempt at leadership in this issue, which was a vote of no confidence in the government, failed, and Parliament did, as a matter of fact, have confidence in the current government. So to a certain extent, your first part of this motion is that we should attempt to have a general election first, has now failed. We are now on to step 2, which you describe in your motion as, step 2 is we should consider a second referendum. So I actually feel that we're proposing this after the ship has failed. In fact, Councillor O'Brien said, failing that a general election happens, we should move to a second referendum. So I actually feel, given that you have just failed in trying to secure a general election, we are now at that second referendum stage. Secondly, Madam Mayor, is my fear of a hard, disorderly Brexit. I don't know what that means, but I listen to the experts, I listen to the people that tell us that it will be horrific for this country, that people will be worse off. Only this morning, I was listening to, the President of the National Union of Farmers, that it's not the most famous radical organisation, who described a hard Brexit as an abyss for British farming and the British food industry. And I'm concerned that with 10 weeks to go to a hard Brexit potentially, and that's what our current legislation says, taking 5 weeks off now for general election is not what the public expects its politicians to do, and that would be my concern. And I fear that in only calling for a general election, what Labour's Westminster front bench is doing is in fact risking that hard Brexit. And fourthly, Madam Mayor, is that a general election will not solve the Brexit answer because Labour doesn't actually know what it wants. Yeah? So I try very hard not to listen to what Jeremy Corbyn says, Madam Mayor. I have better things to do with my life. But I did listen very carefully to what he tried to say on the Jeremy Marsh show on Sunday morning, where he basically twisted and turned with every sentence when he was pressed on what Labour's policy on Brexit was, and it actually seems that his policy is to somehow that he is going to be capable of negotiating a better Brexit, with only 5 weeks to go, which I don't believe. I mean, I do pity the Labour Party because it has what it believes in, and it has what the vast majority of its members and elected representatives believes in, but somehow it's frightened that the voters won't vote for it. And I would say that it should just stand up for what it believes in, which is remaining in the European Union. So, Madam Mayor, this amendment is about something that the ship has sailed. There isn't going to be a general election. It's unfortunate because we wish we could get rid of this government, but we can't. So we now need to move directly to the democratic thing to do, which is to give the British people the final say on the Brexit deal which is put before us. So we will be opposing this amendment, and we will oppose the substantive if the amendment is carried. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I have now proposed to vote on the amendment. Can I see all those in favour of the amendment? Okay. Can I see all those against the amendment? Carried. Are there any further amendments? If not, can I move to vote on the substantive motion? Can I see all those in favour of the motion as amended? All those against? Any abstentions? So the motion as amended is carried. Thank you very much. Item 4, public question time, and thank you, members of the public. I hope you found the last hour interesting and useful. A period of up to 30 minutes is set aside for questions from the public. No questions have been received in advance of the meeting. In accordance with Council Procedure Rules, I now invite questions from any members of the public present. So if you wish to speak, to ask a question, please indicate, and a microphone will be handed to you. Please state your name. No supplementary question is allowed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Kieran Gold and I'm from Moorside Ward. 2 months ago, I was listening to the Council's full session on YouTube and was quite frankly amazed at what I was hearing. The Councillor for North Manor, when referring to the Council's budget, criticised Labour's alleged mismanagement of the budget and failed to recognise that £95 million has been cut from said budget. I asked the Council leader, how concerning is it that such narrow-minded views are held in this chamber, and does he agree with me that said Council should apologise for his attempts to mislead the public listening? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Can I call upon the leader to respond to that question?
Well, thank you very much for your question. You may have seen in the debate that we've just had, there are often two different versions of reality that exist, or maybe even three in this chamber. But what we cannot argue with are facts and figures. You are quite right. In fact, we've almost lost £100 million from our budget. That's almost 70% of our controllable budget. And despite what Theresa May says in terms of austerity being over, it quite frankly is not. And quite frankly, as was mentioned at the last council meeting, it's the most vulnerable in our communities and the most vulnerable in our society which suffer the most. Austerity has played a massive part in growing the inequality in our borough, and we're doing the best that we can to mitigate the impacts of that. I talked at the last council meeting about our anti-poverty strategy, about the investment we're making in our communities, but it is difficult and it is only going to get harder. And actually, if it wasn't for the hard work of the Labour administration over the last 12 months to 2 years, you would have seen the impact of austerity in different ways, such as the closure of the walk-in centres. You know, it isn't for me to ask other members of this chamber to apologise. It's for them to examine their own consciences about whether or not they have made correct statements. But what is undeniable is that austerity is having an impact. But even in a time of cuts, this Labour administration will continue to invest, will look to continue to grow our borough economically, and will continue to focus on giving all our residents the best start and chances in life. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Are there any further questions?
Hi, Sam Hurst, proud Ratcliffe resident. A letter went out this week to the residents of Ratcliffe based on proposals based on the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. Given that this administration has done more to destroy Ratcliffe and its amenities than any administration in the last 30 years, What are the council leader's proposals to rebuild the amenities in Ratcliffe that he's destroyed? Swimming baths, gone. Civic suite, gone. 2 high schools, gone, amalgamated without Plan B. So what can he pronounce clearly to the residents of Ratcliffe what his proposals are? Because this is too vague and it makes no sense to anybody.
I'll call upon the leader to respond to that
I
question.
couldn't get up quick enough, Madam Mayor. You know, my old predecessor, if you remember him, used to say, I'll take no lessons. I'm not going to take lessons from a former Conservative Radcliffe councillor who was on this council when the decision was made to close Radcliffe Riverside High School, when you were a governor of it. It is a disgrace for you to sit here and talk about the devastation of Radcliffe. You know as well as I do that a new school in Radcliffe was going to be built using Building Schools for the Future money set out by the Labour government. And guess what happened? In 2010, we had the wonderful coalition which scrapped that. And it didn't just scrap the funding, it also scrapped the ability for local authorities to directly build new schools. So when we talk about the destination of Radcliffe, we just had a question here about austerity and the ability to deliver public services. When are Conservative candidates like you and Conservative councillors going to take some responsibility for what you are doing to our communities? And I'll ask you something else. When we look at local elections, when we look at elections, people are putting an X in the Labour box. We might not have 2 now, but at the last general election, 2 Labour MPs were elected in Bury South and Bury North. In terms of Radcliffe, what have we done? Demolished it. I think, as I've said, I think you take some culpability for that when you're actually in power, and embarrassingly, we're a governor of that school. Now, let me say this to you. Madam Mayor, may I finish without the commentary from... Yes, I may. I'm just going to continue, but this is a really important point. As someone who has lived in Radcliffe for over 30 years...
Please, can I have some respect for the person speaking?
30 years I've lived in Radcliffe.
Take it down a bit.
We have sought to invest, whether it's £2 million on the new bus station, whether it's £1 million on the new market, whether actually on council-owned land and a crucial investment getting Lidl into the town centre. We are working in a difficult time in terms of regenerating town centres. And regeneration of town centres takes 3 key components: new housing, new leisure and new retail. We are developing the brownfield East Lancashire paper mill site, which will deliver 400 affordable units around the town centre. People of Radcliffe still have access to swimming pool and gym facilities are actually better used than the previous building, which actually, decisions which were made actually make it more cost-effective to run. Radcliffe has a very bright future. We're announcing £500,000 worth of investment between now and May in terms of improving the look and feel of Radcliffe. £3 million has been spent on resurfacing, is earmarked for resurfacing roads in Radcliffe, and actually quite a lot of that has already been spent. We are committed to investing in Radcliffe as well. Well, £46 million has been secured, including investment from this council for our flood defences for the town of Radcliffe, which was devastated. And that took 2 years to get, thanks to the slow-paced efforts of your government. I actually had to go down to London to secure that additional investment. So we are investing in Radcliffe very, very heavily. But we will not take lessons, I'm afraid, from people who made those decisions in the first place. Whether you like it or not, and I can see you shaking your head, the reason why Radcliffe does not have a high school now is because when the Conservatives in those dark days ran this council from 2007 to 2011, they didn't care about it, which is why Bob Bibby actually proposed to close the Radcliffe Civic Hall. Do you remember that? In fact, we ran a campaign against it, believe it or not. These are difficult times, but we are investing, like we're doing in Prestwich, like we're doing in Whitefield, like we're doing in Bury, and like, as you'll hear a bit later on, in Ramsbottom. But really, when you're talking about devastation, I think it is slightly rich, Madam Mayor.
Right. Can I just ask everyone, please, to take the heat out of the comments this evening, wherever you're sitting, because we've got a lot more to get through. Thank you. Are there any further questions?
Richard Gold, I'm a resident in Sedgley. Just a very, very simple question. I was wondering how the council is progressing on its programme of repairing potholes.
Councillor.
Madam Mayor, I will ask Councillor Quinn to answer that question, but if I may, Perhaps we wouldn't have to raise our voices if there wasn't constant muttering and abuse from that side of the chamber. It's impossible to hear people from the gallery when people are trying to talk over you. Councillor Quinn, I'd ask you to answer that question, please.
Thanks, Mr Gold. I might just have to have them figures at hand. Actually, the best... Where is it? I can't see it. Thank you. At the back, thank you. The best remedy for a pothole is a resurface. Now, we've got 660 kilometres of road in Bury. The formula used, we should get about £6 to £7 million per year for that. We actually get 2. So if you times that by 8 years of austerity, we're about 40 million quid short. So that's why we took the decision to borrow 10 million quid, 8.5 million for resurfacing, 1.5 million for repairs to roads. What that enabled us to do, Mr Gold, was to put an extra crew out doing the potholes. We've got 2 crews instead of 1. They took advantage of the un-English summer last year. We also got our new jet patcher. We hired one, so we got our new one. We got our own jet patcher. So you asked for the figures. 17-18 output, that's the jobs completed, up 31% on 16-17. 18-19 output, currently projected to be 33% up on 17-18. Repair jobs completed on time, up by 17% in 17-18 compared with 16-17. Repair jobs completed on time projected to increase by a further 20% to circa 80%, that's this year. And what we have done so far in 18-19, repaired in excess of 9,500 potholes. The 17-18 demand for highway repairs is up by 12% on the 16-17, and the 18-19 demand for highway repairs is projected to be up by 8% on 17-18. Thank you, Mr Gold.
Can I have any further questions? Yeah.
Madam Mayor, my name is Chris Neville. My question is around the GMSF in Simister. So given that there is some substantial plans for development there, what measures are going to be taken to ensure that Simister Lane, for example, doesn't become congested with traffic and used as a through route?
Can I call on the leader too?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll ask Councillor O'Brien to answer that.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. So as you rightly point out, there is the GMSF plans around Simister, and a substantial part of that on the northern side is to do with the Northern Gateway, but nearer Simister village itself there is the housing allocation being proposed. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later as we discuss some of the questions around the sort of detail of the GMSF. In a particular response to your question about the highways, one of the key parts of delivering that site is going to be a new link road, which we would see actually come and join up parts of the Middleton area of this development site and link it south of Simister and Simister village itself. What that helpfully does is it firstly ensures that development shouldn't be happening and won't be happening without that infrastructure in place to begin with. But secondly, it also means that there is access via the sort of Middleton side of the Simister area rather than the existing network, which, as I'm sure you'll know, is already quite narrow and can be quite congested. So what we're trying to do is, it's a difficult challenge sometimes to deliver on some of this, but we're very clear about the infrastructure that is required to deliver these sites that hopefully will mitigate a large impact on the existing residents in that area. There are other things that we can look at to protect the character of Simister village itself, and we will look to explore those options. But what we want to hear from are residents who are concerned about protecting the character of Simister. We're happy to go and meet with them. I know we have plans to, and we would encourage them to make their submissions about the future of their village. But, as I say, we will try and meet those challenges in the best way possible, including getting that key infrastructure in place before any development takes place. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Are there any further questions? There's someone on this side in the corner as well.
Hello, Madam Mayor. My name's Charlotte Allen. I'd just like to ask a question about recycling. Recent visits to Bury Recycling Centre, all the skips seem to be full, apart from the one for unrecyclable waste, which I assume goes to landfill or gets incinerated. If we're trying to encourage recycling in the borough, is it time to expand our recycling facilities so that people can actually recycle the items that they want to?
Call on the leader to respond to that question.
I'll ask Councillor Quinn to answer that question.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. What we are in the middle of is renegotiating the contract for waste disposal in Greater Manchester, which will come in basically 3 delivery areas, one of which is the household waste recycling centres. So when we get that new contract, we'll be able to look at household waste recycling centres and how they operate. And if, are you talking about the one Cemetery Road in Ratcliffe?
No.
Which one?
The one in Bury.
The one in Bury. If there's a problem with it, what I will do, I'll get onto the Waste Authority and get them to look through, I think Viridor Rue on it, and see what we can do to improve it. Because we do need to obviously encourage people to take their waste to the household waste recycling centres where they can dispose of it properly. About 10% of our waste does go to landfill, which is a vast improvement what we used to be. So if you could leave your details with someone and I can get hold of Viridor through the Greater Manchester Waste officers at the Combined Authority and see if there are any problems at that one. But thanks for your question.
I'm sorry that there's just one question allowed. I'm sorry about that. Is there another question?
My name's Paul Lewis. I'm from Ramsbottom Ward. Madam Mayor, without the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, is there a risk that all Greenbelt, including that around Ramsbottom, could be developed upon?
Call on the leader to respond to that question.
Ask Councillor O'Brien to respond to that question.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. There are lots of risks associated with abandoning the GMSF outright, and I think that they are worth addressing some of those impacts. The first of which is by avoiding a collaborative approach to developing the strategic planning policy. We actually risk losing the benefit of what we're actually currently proposing, which is shifting 2,000 units of our allocation to our colleagues across the conurbation. So by not doing it, we actually have a higher target we'd have to meet. Instead of 9,500, it'd be 11,500, and those extra 2,000 would have to be found on Greenbelt sites in Bury. So that's the first risk. Second risk is if we don't have one at all, and we actually open ourselves up to challenge by developers, you're absolutely right to highlight that it won't just be the sites that we're proposing that won't be Greenbelt and at risk. As I say, we'll have this debate, I'm sure, throughout the night. It could be any aspect and any area of our Greenbelt could be susceptible to a challenge from a developer. And that's not an idle risk, an idle threat. That has happened and continues to happen up and down the country. That without long-term strategic plans set over a longer period of time, identifying a stream of housing coming on board, areas can be picked off by developers, really, and it would be a free-for-all. Whether that would include Ramsbottom, that would depend on the developer, but it could equally be Tottington, it could be Ainsworth, it could be Hollins, areas that are currently protected by having a GMSF. So there are multiple risks to not having a GMSF, and what we hope to do is to sort of encourage this process along and find the best deal for Bury and Greater Manchester that will secure the jobs and housing that we certainly need going forward. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from the public?
Good evening, Madam Mayor. I'm Anne Aldin and I'm from Unsworth Ward. And I'd like to ask the Leader of the Council what is being done to address the question of homeless people. What is the Council doing about them?
Thank you. Councillor.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to call you Councillor Ordin then. Mrs. Ordin. homelessness is a huge problem, and it's not just simply what we as a council are doing, it's what we're doing collectively across Greater Manchester with the work that's being led by the Mayor of Greater Manchester. You may be familiar with the policy of a bed every night, seeking to ensure that rough sleepers across the conurbation have somewhere to go, and not just somewhere to stay for the night, but also a means of support to help deal with some of the issues that are being faced. As a local authority, we're taking an interventionist approach. I know there's been a focus on rough sleepers, as I've mentioned, but in places like Manchester, and I mention other districts because this is all part of our own problem as people shift between districts. One of the biggest issues is actually around homelessness of families. Again, impacts an impact of austerity, welfare reform, and so on and so forth. So we're making accommodation available. We're working with different community groups within the borough to ensure there aren't any rough sleepers. And where possible, what we're doing is taking an early interventionist approach to try and stop people becoming homeless in the first place, whether that's directing them to get the right benefits or what have you. But as a local authority, there is a limit to what we can do, but I think we're doing as much as we can within the constraints that we face. I mentioned in an answer to an earlier question, we set aside £200,000 out of our budget in terms of having an anti-poverty strategy, again to support the early intervention work that we're doing, and we work very closely with our housing provider, Six Town Housing, to identify those families and people most at risk of being made homeless, again in a means to stop it happening in the first place. But despite the Mayor's aspirations, it is clearly still a huge problem, and I think that's something that we all should certainly be ashamed of or show deep regret that in the 21st century, in the second decade of it, that homelessness is such a big problem on our streets right now. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. We still have a little more time if there are any more questions. Okay, thank you. Item 5, recommendations of Cabinet and Council committees. Corporate Parenting Board held on 20th of November 2018, Annual Report 2017-18. To be moved by Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just before I move it, I just want to say a few comments on the report. Firstly, just to thank our staff in the Council who cover a broad range of aspects of corporate parenting, but do fantastic jobs under incredibly difficult circumstances. Just to thank also our partners as well. It's not just the Council who are corporate parents, it's our partners in health, it's our partners in the police, in housing, and really in schools as well. And they do a tremendous job. Just thank our board members as well. We actually have fantastic attendance for what is quite a sort of detailed meeting full of 2-hour-long debates and detailed reports. So just to thank our board members, and actually we get fantastic involvement all cross-party as well, and I think it's one issue that we, broadly speaking, can all come together around and hopefully deliver on our responsibilities to it. So just a thank you to them. And finally, but certainly not least of all, thank our young people who continue to participate in activities, attend our board meetings, share the wonderful work that they're doing, have a tenacity and an ambition to overcome the obstacles that are put in front of them, and really serve as an inspiration to all of us at the board and all of those who come into contact with them about what they do. There are a whole host of wonderful successes, and they're all in the report, so I would encourage people to read it, because whilst there are areas we highlight we want to improve on, there are lots of good positive stories, and especially in an area like this where we're dealing with some of the most vulnerable children and young people who've gone through some of the worst experiences that I'm sure nobody here would want to even contemplate. They still come out the other side, many of them delivering fantastic results and going on to do wonderful things. Just wanted to highlight a few things that have been that we've made good progress in. First of which is that over the last year we had the highest number of counsellors trained on the Total Respect training programme, which is actually run in collaboration with the Children's Rights Service, but also the young people themselves who help deliver that training. It's a day-long training, but it's probably the best day-long training you'd ever experience. There will be some dates coming up for that. I think there are 4 times throughout the year, and I would encourage anyone who's not done it or wishes to go again to really take the time to do that. We've also passed policies making council care leavers exempt from council tax up until the age of 25. That is going to make a huge difference to many of our care leavers, and we've recently just announced, or will be announcing, that we're going to establish free leisure passes for our children and young people in care and care leavers, so that they can actually access council facilities that would otherwise be out of reach for them, for many of them, because of financial reasons. And so we've delivered on that. We also have a host of apprenticeships throughout the council that are from our cohorts as well. And that is, again, the council taking its resources, albeit limited and under pressure, to put our children and young people at the heart of some of these incredibly challenging posts and really see them flourish. And there's certainly ones I've met that are doing some amazing things. And finally, we also had the Believe and Achieve Awards in the Elizabethan Suite, which was absolutely packed of young people who had done some amazing things. And it was fantastic for, I think, the service areas as well to be able to celebrate the achievements of the young people. And I believe it went on well into the night, you know, not too late, but enough that they could celebrate and just let their hair down a little bit after, you know, I'm sure, a busy year. So, just to summarise, there are lots of areas that we can improve on, and we know that, and we have action plans and we have reports. But sometimes it's good just to acknowledge that in a very difficult area, under very difficult circumstances, we are delivering on lots of good outcomes for our children and young people, because they are our children and we are their parents. And just because it has the word corporate in front of it shouldn't mean that there's any less tenacity on our side, any less love and any less aspiration for their futures. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that useful summary. I call on Councillor Briggs to second the report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to second the report.
Are there any comments or questions? Are there any amendments or other motions? So the motion is to accept the corporate parenting report. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? Any abstentions? So that motion is carried. Item 6, Leader's Statement in Cabinet Question Time. I call on Councillor Shorey to make a statement on the work of the Cabinet and other matters.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given the lateness of the hour, I will seek to keep this as brief as possible. And may I take this opportunity to wish everyone in the chamber a happy New Year. Madam Mayor, I'm sure we were all stunned with the sad news that a local family was rocked by tragedy last week, with the accident on the M58 taking the life of Joe Cairns from Radcliffe, along with Anne Kerr from Stockport. We were all shocked and saddened that one of Bury's young people has died in such terrible circumstances. Joe was a massive character with an infectious smile and a great sense of humour. As a local authority, we are providing support and counselling to Joe's family, and our hearts go out to them at this time. We are also supporting the families of the 3 other Bury children who were injured, and I'm sure we all wish them a swift recovery. 2019 will no doubt be a challenging and interesting year for both the country and us locally. I hope that everyone managed to take some time off over the December holiday period and was able to recharge their batteries to meet the many challenges that face us. I'm sure we have all made a commitment, a New Year's resolution. Mine is to get fit for Asda's 10k run, so there's a plug. It's going to be on again, I think, for the 3rd successive year, and I'm hoping to do it under 2 hours. I know, wishful thinking, but you can only aspire. We're all about aspiration. At this time of great uncertainty, nationally, in the region, all authorities in Greater Manchester are continuing to work together to support our collective ambitions. Therefore, I'm sure that everyone will be aware of the significant announcements in the region over the last few days. The Greater Manchester Plan for Jobs, Homes and the Environment, commonly known as the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, has been radically rewritten. This new document, when finalised, will have major implications for the way the borough develops over the next 20 years. Following the announcement of the original proposals, over 27,000 responses were received across Greater Manchester to the initial consultation, of which around 4,500 were specific to Bury. The biggest concern being raised related to the impact on the green belt and its use for development. These views have been listened to and new proposals have been published. I would like to stress that nothing has been agreed yet. This is still a proposal and subject to a second consultation beginning on the 21st of January. As promised, we have written to all 84,000 households in the borough, giving residents detailed information about the proposals and the impact on their specific wards. I would encourage everyone to have their say. We listened following the first consultation, radically rewrote the plans, and we will listen again. So what do the new proposals mean for Greater Manchester and Bury in particular? The latest proposals focus on the importance of the use of brownfield sites rather than greenbelt. Over the last few years, we have been very successful at using brownfield sites, with over 90% of new homes being built in these locations. Under the new proposals, half of new homes will also be built on brownfield sites. However, because of our previous focus and success at encouraging brownfield sites, we are now limited with the supply of brownfield land available in the borough. Despite this, in the new proposals overall, there is a 41% net reduction in the loss of greenbelt proposed in the conurbation compared to the first draft. In Bury, this equates to a reduction in the loss of greenbelt from 20% in the first draft to 12% in these new proposals, with areas such as the proposed housing development at Holcombe Brook and employment at Gin Hall removed from the list of potential areas for development. This proposed 41% reduction equates to a net reduction of 496 hectares of greenbelt land. In area terms, and I think I might just re-stress that point, the proposal equates to a reduction of 496 hectares of greenbelt land. In area terms, this is the largest reduction out of all the 10 Greater Manchester districts. It constitutes a fifth of all the land that is now proposed to be greenbelt from the first draft. In comparison, this is over 3.5 times that of Bolton's reduction. On the basis of these proposals, Bury would be one of only 4 districts in Greater Manchester that would have over half of its area, that's 52% to be precise, being in the green belt. We would sit behind only Rochdale and Wigan in this respect, and we would be well above the Greater Manchester total of 45%. The framework will also benefit the borough through new infrastructure, businesses and of course jobs created. It is important that Bury remains a key player in the development of the region and our part in supporting the Northern Gateway Initiative, which will seek to address the north-south imbalance in the conurbation. A key part of the overall strategy is to support the competitiveness of the northern districts, and it is essential that we are part of this. We need to work together as authorities to attract new investment and partners to support our plans, which can only bring benefits to us all. I fully appreciate that any loss of Greenbelt will be unpopular. However, I must point out that some of the land proposed to be released in the Greenbelt will not be developed, such as that earmarked for recreational space. Similarly, some areas will already have development on them, such as major roads or motorways, including the M66, have existing non-residential buildings, such as the training building and car park at Seedfield, or be part of existing built-up areas, such as Simister Village. Sites are selected using strict Greater Manchester-based methodology that seeks to locate sites in sustainable locations close to areas that already have infrastructure or have opportunities to implement new infrastructure. The government has given us a housing target of 11,500 homes. However, we have worked hard to negotiate some of this target to be met elsewhere in Greater Manchester, and we have successfully reduced this target down to 9,500 to reduce the amount of greenbelt we need to release, whilst also helping us to ensure that we have an appropriate amount of new homes to meet current and future generations. However, Madam Mayor, this is not just about numbers. It is also important that we get the right kind of housing, as people responding to the consultation rightly stressed. While there will always be a demand for home ownership, there will be people who need that extra bit of support to find somewhere to live and call home. Therefore, we will work with partners and developers to ensure that affordable housing options are provided across the borough. This will help us to ensure that people live in good quality accommodation and that poorer quality private rented accommodation becomes a thing of the past. Linked to the GMSF proposals, Greater Manchester is also focusing on addressing the growing problem of homelessness in the region. In Bury, we will continue to work to address homelessness, both regionally and beyond. The impact of new homeless legislation places greater responsibilities on council services. Therefore, we need to be creative at seeking effective housing solutions for those people in the most abject need. We fully support the Mayor of Greater Manchester's Bed for a Night campaign to help ensure that no one has to spend a night living on the streets and that support is available to seek more permanent rehousing options. In addition to cutting the loss of greenbelt by over half, the GMSF also gives new protections on green spaces, including a presumption against fracking in Greater Manchester. The plan recognises the need to promote zero carbon technologies and reduce reliance on carbon-based fuels. Greater Manchester has a challenging ambition to be carbon neutral by 2038, and to do this, all development needs to be carbon neutral by 2028. Greater Manchester therefore believe that we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground and will not support fracking. We, as a chamber, of course, have already given our views on fracking and I'm sure would wholeheartedly support this move. Another GM priority is the environment, and we will also be mindful of the impact on the environment of all these new initiatives. There is now less reliance on private cars in the Greater Manchester plan, which means there is a greater focus on public transport. We want to work to make that more effective and be a more workable solution, with new train and Metrolink stations, extensions of the Metrolink park and ride schemes, and also promoting the use of cycling using the new B network, formerly known as B Lines, pioneered by Chris Boardman to develop a world-class cycling and walking network. There are also initiatives to address air pollution, with the potential to introduce clean air zones, not congestion zones, restricting the use of the most polluting HGVs, LGVs, buses and taxis. This will help the areas in the borough with the most pollution, noted in a study published last year. Moving on, Madam Mayor, and I will end here for the sake of time. The Council continues to review and manage its budget, which has been decimated by the austerity cuts over the last number of years. This has been one of our main areas of focus since the appointment of our new Chief Executive. All Cabinet members have been working closely with Executive Directors to ensure we continue to balance our budget over the coming year and into the future. I am confident in the hard work of Cabinet members and officers in terms of their ability to help reach a balanced position, and also about the long-term sustainability of this organisation, which has been greatly helped by the acceleration of our integration of health and social care. Madam Mayor, I will leave the speech there to allow us to move on to other items. Thank you.
Thank you. A maximum of 40 minutes will be allocated for the answers to written questions. The answers to any unanswered questions at the end of this time will be circulated to all councillors. 23 written questions have been received and printed versions of these are attached to the back of the order of proceedings. I call on Councillor O'Brien to answer question 1 from Councillor Gartside relating to the GMSF petition.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members of the Council will be aware that across Greater Manchester there were 27,000 comments received during the first draft consultation, and a large part of that came from Bury, and within that there were the signatures around the Walshaw site. Now, all of those comments have been read and listened to and taken account of, and we certainly acknowledge many of the concerns that residents had legitimately about lots of aspects of that first draft. We are still in a position where we'll need to balance those concerns against the need to find enough land to meet the figures that the government themselves have still imposed upon Greater Manchester to deliver in terms of new housing. That is an important point to make. The government have chosen to ignore the latest household projections and instead required local authorities to achieve a much higher housing target that was derived from previous year's projections that more closely align with their housing targets. That's not necessarily a point of contention that is clear to see. The figures said one thing and the government has told us to do another. So we remain, despite that, fully committed to our priority of brownfield development. The simple fact is that even with a brownfield first strategy that is proactive, and we're starting to deliver large parts of that, we would not have the space and the land to deliver it. Regrettably, we've had no other option but to look at Greenbelt. But as the leader mentioned, we've managed to reduce that Greenbelt loss by 41% compared to the previous draft. And that does include retaining a significant part of the Walshaw site as Greenbelt. So whilst we can't retain it all, we are doing everything we can and have shown that in the plan to reduce it where we can. We have a long time of consultation to go, and like I reiterate, we do want to hear from people, and we'll discuss this next, I believe. But we've tried where we can to make the impact, and Walshaw has been included in that, albeit not entirely.
Councillor, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I thank Councillor O'Brien for his answer, but I'm not so sure whether he's been briefed on this. But back in 2016, I collected more than 2,100 signatures in and around Walshaw and Tottington. So again, Madam Mayor, I think this is another example of this Labour administration's contempt for our local democracy and anybody who submits petitions. So moving on to my question, Madam Mayor, can I ask Councillor O'Brien to please look again at the Walshaw Brook site? Yes, you've now retained the part of it which is off Dow Lane, but the vast majority of it is still included in this plan. And I'd especially ask him to look at the land which is immediately adjacent to Scobell Street. Scobell Street in the last few years has suffered many incidents of flooding, and many householders around that area have suffered real hardship when these floods have happened. Now, the actual land adjacent to it acts as an absorber of rainfall. Now, if that was to be built on, I'd dread to think what would happen. So can you please look at that again, Councillor O'Brien? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you briefly respond?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I don't think there's any sense of contempt from the Council in dealing with what we are obliged to deliver, and that is a plan that will meet legal thresholds and ultimately have to be passed by the government. And I would just make the point that if the government doesn't want Greenbelt being lost, it should not propose figures that mean we have to lose Greenbelt. And I think therein lies a far greater contempt for local democracy and local decision making. It's from the government to bury where there is contempt on this issue. We will gladly look at aspects of the site. We will look at alternatives to it. It does remain true, however, that whilst this plan releases Greenbelt, there is still many stages before development can take place. And of course, issues around flood risk are key parts of any planning application that would come forward. So there is still protections for land that is at risk of flooding. I would just push back and say that if we are being asked to take sites out, I would be interested to know where we would put sites in to replace that. And if we had, well, and if you listen to the answer, the point is that there's not enough on brownfield. There's not enough on brownfield, and we're already shifting 2,000 across Greater Manchester. So we can pick solutions out of, fantasy land, or we can deal with it. and actually try and put protections in place where possible, but the figures are the figures, and I don't really hear many realistic alternatives.
I call on Councillor O'Brien to answer question 2 from Councillor Bailey relating to GMSF consultation. There are several questions about the GMSF. Can I ask people if a point's been made to try not to make it again if many questions come up?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be brief. There will be an 8-week consultation running from the 21st of March to the 21st of January to the 18th of March, in which views will be considered and filtered to Greater Manchester, who will be running the consultation. They'll have a range of ways that people can get involved. However, in Bury, we are doing our part in that as well. We have already written out to 84,000 households with letters detailing how residents can be involved in this. We also have a series of drop-in sessions in which residents can come along and speak to council officers, as we've just had in the appeal room before council. Council has been able to do that as well. And we will continue to put out information on social media, in council buildings, and wherever possible, because this is an important plan. It is controversial, but if we shy away from it because it's controversial, then I don't think that is the right thing to do. This is important, it must be done right, and residents do have a right to be consulted on this and have their say on it. So we fully intend to honour that.
Councillor, do you have a supplementary?
No supplementary, Madam Mayor, but thank you for that concise answer, Councillor O'Brien.
I call on Councillor Shorey to answer question 3 from Councillor Bailey relating to the Prestwich Town Centre challenge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Bailey, for your questions. It certainly is an exciting time in relation to the regeneration of Prestwich Town Centre. At the last meeting of the Prestwich Town Centre challenge, at which the Mayor of Greater Manchester was in attendance, it was of course a public meeting, reference was made to the fact that there was a funding gap, there was a viability gap in terms of what was required to actually build out the new development and what it would be worth after. And because of that commercial reality, that had posed a blockage. And we'd committed to go away to try and find how we could bridge that viability gap. I am pleased to say that due to the hard work of our officers, working very closely with those at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, we are much closer now to finding a sustainable financial solution in the very short term to get this work off the ground. And it is an exciting proposition. We envisage an exciting mixed-use development, which may include new shops, restaurants, a council hub, to replace any loss of other council amenity, a food hall, a cinema, high-quality apartments. And other key components are that concept of a wellbeing village, which would incorporate later life residential accommodation, which I think is important, because when we talk about the right type of housing and affordable housing, we tend to focus on young people getting on the housing ladder. We shouldn't forget that in our borough, we have one of the fastest growing ageing populations as well, and their needs need to be catered for. That wellbeing village would incorporate leisure and spa facilities, plus a new state-of-the-art health centre, of course, to replace the walk-in centre which currently resides there. So we're currently working on the funding package, working with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and I'm pleased to say we are very close to closing that gap, and hopefully we'll be able to make an announcement very shortly in the next couple of months. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor, do you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks again, Councillor Shorey, for that concise answer.
On Councillor Quinn to answer question 4 from Councillor Silbiger relating to additional bins.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Thanks, Councillor, for your question. Since 2016, we've received 604 applications for a second-grade bin. 467 have been approved, 137 declined. Any household can apply for a second-grade bin. To be successful, they must demonstrate that they're recycling everything that they can in their 3 recycling bins. This will be assessed by a recycling officer who will visit their household and carry out a waste audit. We can supply residents with extra blue and green bins to help them recycle. There's also some annual figures. If you want me to go through them, I can do. All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Councillor Quinn. My question is only, I'm sure you've seen the application, I've got it here in front of me, the application to get another green bin. It's quite onerous, it's got like please list below all the people who permanently live in your property for 365 days a year. I assume that's not literal, but it's sort of bold and underlined. It asks you to list all the reasons for requesting additional grey bin, all the measures you're currently taking to minimise and recycle. And I've heard from people who've undergone the waste audit, and it's quite rigorous, as in if you've got one item of paper or plastic in the grey bin, then you refuse, sort of. Now, I wanted to ask whether perhaps there could be a set criteria where households with above a certain amount of members living at the household could automatically qualify, not have to go through this, because I wouldn't even bother applying, because I've got 4 little ones of my own, thank God, and we try to bring them up to put things in the bin after they're finished, and it's impossible. It's bad enough having 4 bins outside, I don't want 4 bins inside. So we try our best, and we do, you know, all the green ones, the blue ones, they're all full, but certainly items do creep into the grey bins as well. So I wouldn't bother either. I'd go for a private collection, which I can't afford, or just manage, and it's a red letter day every 3rd Monday. So whether it could be, sort of the criteria could be eased somewhat, and households over a certain amount could automatically qualify for a grey bin. That's my request, please.
Councillor Quinn.
Yeah, I mean, we're always willing to look at the process, and if there's anything wrong with it, we will obviously, you know, I always say, let's look at things with a common sense attitude. The problem we have with our bin collection all over Greater Manchester is contamination. In some areas, you can get a contamination rate of up to 17% in the commingled bin. In paper bins, in the green and card, you can get, mostly it's about 8%, but you can get nappies in there, you can get sanitary towels in there. So we need to be looking, because that contamination, it can cost us money. It also can have an adverse effect on the machinery. And I'll give you an example. We have had numerous fires at transfer loading stations, and what people have done is they put batteries into what we would say, the brown bin. If you expose a lithium-ion battery to oxygen, it bursts into flame. Now, one of the sites at Waithlands in Rochdale did burn down. The problem with that is, all over the country, is many waste authorities now cannot get insurance due to incidents of fire. I think we've had 28 fires, and a lot of this, obviously the small fires, the crews down there can put them out quickly, but we will always reserve our right to audit the bin. And it can be a help to residents, because plastics, I'll admit, can be confusing. And so if we can send auditors, the audit team down there and say, that goes in that bin and that goes in that, well, that's a better cost saving for us. But I will always look for common sense. And, you know, if people are being over officious, then I'll say, no, we want common sense. But, contamination is a real issue. And that's why we send the officers down there. Could be that the officer says, well, you know, do you want a 360 litre bin? They're available. So we want to do what we can to help people to recycle. And I'm well aware of, in our ward, of large families, especially in the Orthodox communities, and we need to do as much as we can to help them. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
I call on Councillor Tariq to answer question 5 from Councillor Cathcart relating to the Social Capital Fund.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Bury Council, in conjunction with the Leader of the Council, Councillor Shorey, allocated £600,000 to communities to fund social capital projects, which was nominally £100,000 per township area. And this essentially, Madam Mayor, was building on the work that's included within the Neighbourhood Engagement Framework, which elected members will be familiar with, and the funding that's available via the framework includes the pitch, which has taken place over the last 18 months in every township, and also through delegated budgets for elected members. And of course, in the Prestwich area, we also have Park Life, where that pot of money is also available to the local community. We believe that local people know their own communities best and know what will make a real difference in their neighbourhood. The Social Capital Fund will further develop and devolve power and decision-making to local people, putting them at the heart of everything that we do. There was a huge amount of interest, Madam Mayor, pleased to report, and we received applications from a number of fantastic local projects aimed at improving the lives of people across our borough. Following an initial scoring process, a short list of projects was produced, which then went to a panel which met on the 18th of December for final decision. I'm pleased to report that 23 innovative projects were either fully or partly funded, and we look forward to seeing the tangible impact that these projects will have to the people of Bury. And I can confirm, Madam Mayor, that the Social Capital Fund will run for 2 more years, and information will be made available for the 2019-20 round of funding in the near future. Can I take this opportunity, Madam Mayor, to thank elected members who helped promote the Social Capital Fund, and also ask elected members if there is any feedback that they can provide for the next round of funding, then they can send that directly to myself via email. I'm happy to feed that back to the team. Thank you.
Cathcart, do you have a supplementary?
Well, Madam Mayor, actually, I think you've gone against procedure because he isn't actually here, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. I think the point my colleague is making is, are written questions to proceed if the councillor who's put them on the order paper is not present in the council chamber, Madam Mayor?
Didn't used to be allowed.
Madam Mayor,
I appreciate that, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor, could I just? I'm grateful for Councillor Cathcart not being here. Could I ask a supplementary question about the particular? And it's not.
It's not the procedure, is it? It was my mistake to not realise.
Good try,
But please feel free to email Councillor with your query after.
Has the rule changed? It used to be. You just used to send in writing the answer to the member.
Councillor Cathcart, the question originated from Councillor Cathcart. I did not know. That question, if you'd like to email everyone with what you said, that would be absolutely fine. Right, well, we do need to move on. I call on Councillor Simpson to answer question 6 from Councillor Preston relating to winter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Preston. Planning to meet the pressures expected over the winter months began in Bury at the beginning of August. With all partner organisations represented, analysis was performed of what worked well in the previous year and what required improvements were undertaken and new ideas explored to assist the acute hospitals during their busiest time. A formal plan was produced and reported to the North East Sector Urgent Care Board, where it was felt that Bury's arrangements were robust and an exemplar for other authorities. The Winter Planning Group continued to meet weekly, and plans were seen as dynamic and adaptable to impact on admission rates and deal with the acuity of patients needing urgent care. New discharge to assess beds were commissioned at Heathlands in a newly refurbished unit where all nursing care could be provided, and final assessments undertaken by the discharge to assess team on site. 12 beds were originally block purchased with an option to increase to 19 if demand increased. Fairfield General have, since the end of November, experienced unprecedented levels of attendance at A&E, resulting in much higher rates of admission to their beds, which has increased pressures on the integrated discharge team to increase the number of discharges. The team have been pivotal in ensuring that people are discharged when they are not only medically fit, but also that their onward destination is appropriate and safe. They are very much focused on the needs of the person in the bed, not just the need to release the bed. Acuity of patients has been extremely high, and some very ill people have been transferred to Beely's Community Hospital to continue their treatment and recovery, and Killalea have been praised for their flexible approach to receiving patients ready to be discharged. Without the support from Bury Council staff, the hospitals would struggle to cope with the demand. And I think the staff have been really adaptable and flexible, and we've worked in a very agile way to deliver services and working together as a system to deliver. There's also been a higher than normal ambulance attendances at Fairfield, with 98 ambulance attendances on one day. This is higher than North Manchester General Hospital. We continue to work to support the system, and over the last 2 weeks have supported the twice daily Silver Command meetings held at the hospital, where plans have been made for the discharge of each patient deemed fit. The situation's not abating, but plans are in place to use the extra winter planning funding granted by the Department of Health in November to support increases in intermediate discharge planning, staffing and purchase more discharge to assess capacity, and the creation of the trusted assessor role to decrease the time taken for providers to come to the hospital to assess patients. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Preston, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Councillor. No supplementary.
I call on Councillor O'Brien to answer question 7 from Councillor Harris relating to GMSF and affordable starter homes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Harris, for your question. We, of course, work within the National Planning Policy Framework, and that requires strategic planning policies like the GMSF that include anything to do with identifying housing need to look ahead over a minimum 15-year period from the date the plan is adopted. The GMSF, therefore, fully complies with that government policy. Some of the benefits of doing it over the long term are that you provide an element of certainty and have an ability to manage growth and development effectively, ensuring that it can take place in sustainable locations that can take advantage of existing, but also opportunities for new infrastructure. Without a long-term plan approach to this, we would not be able to manage our borough's greenbelt effectively, and I've already mentioned the risks of a free-for-all if we do not have a long-term plan on development. There are examples of when local authorities have been overturned by government planning inspectors. A recent one in Tunbridge and Malling simply decided that there was not enough supply of housing in the 5-year period that they had set, and therefore Greenbelt was released for development. So how accurately can we do that? It's an important question, and of course the debate over the last 12 months has been what exactly are the figures we're working to. What the government have done, and I alluded to it earlier, is take the most recent housing projections and ignored them. And they've gone back to previous years, so back to 2014's projections, and said you need to work on a higher figure to deliver on our policy. So we have actually been in a position where we could have gone into the second draft of the GMSF without any Greenbelt released across Greater Manchester, but the figures have been upped by government policy. In terms of delivering affordable housing, we of course have policies in place to deliver affordable housing, and across Greater Manchester that could potentially deliver 50,000 new affordable homes, which is to be welcomed. However, within that, we have set on proposed ambitious policies in our local plan that require at least 25% of new homes to be genuinely affordable for our residents. Alongside the GMSF, there were a range of other documents, one of which was the Greater Manchester Vision for Housing, and that deals with other aspects of the housing crisis, not just affordability, so that everybody can live in a safe, decent and affordable home in Greater Manchester. That is our aspiration, and we will go into the GMSF process proposing that and hopefully then delivering on it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor, do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, yes, I have. Discussing numbers, actually, because councils, as a council do have control, sole control over figures for housing need. Now, if that's the case, that is the case, why did you choose to use the 2014 figures regarding housing projected need instead of the more current one, 2016, which came out by the Office of National Statistics, which gave a lower projected housing need, and if that was the case, there would be no loss of green belt?
So it's not the case that local authorities have sole responsibility for it, and in fact it was the government that chose to use the figures from 2014, not the figures from 2016. That is the position we're in. It's not really a matter for debate or discussion. It is a fact. We had lower projected figures from 2016. The government ignored them and told us to work with the earlier 2014 projections. Now, we could have turned around and said, we don't want to do that, we don't want the GMSF, we'll just try our luck, but that's not really an alternative. We would have a free-for-all on our green belt, we would have sporadic developments, we would lack the infrastructure, and it would not actually deliver the affordable homes that are safe and decent as well for our residents. So it's not an alternative, and it simply just refutes the case that what was suggested was not true.
I call on Councillor Quinn to answer question 8 from Councillor Cummings relating to 3G pitches.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Thanks for your question, Councillor Cummings. We're now at the final stage of drafting a new playing pitch strategy in partnership with sports governing bodies and local outdoor sports organisations. This will include plans to develop full-size all-weather 3G pitches in partnership with the Lancashire Football Association and the Football Foundation. Bury has been identified by the Lancashire FA as a priority for funding subject to meeting the criteria for investment and sustainability. Third generation, otherwise known as 3G artificial football pitches, are the latest development in synthetic grass surface. They are constructed on a firm base with long pile artificial grass filled with sand and rubber crumb. Following a feasibility study of locations, 2 sites will now be taken forward. Goshen Playing Fields, where a planning application has now been submitted, and at Elton High School, where a planning application will be submitted in February. Any more 3G football pitches after the 2 now brought forward will depend on securing external funding and developing a robust business case. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Cummings, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you very much for that answer, Councillor Quinn. Could you indicate what infrastructure is available with each of the pitches?
Normally, the infrastructure would be not just a grass pitch. It will be surrounded, fenced, because these pitches come close to £800,000 each. So we will fence them off. We'll have the barriers around the pitch. We'll have dressing rooms, and they will be floodlit. So they are a good standalone facility, because obviously, we don't want people going on and wrecking them. So that's what the model should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Councillor O'Brien to answer question 9 from Councillor Stephen Wright relating to GMSF and Greenbelt land.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Wright, for your question. 12% of the borough's Greenbelt is being proposed to be released. That is a significant reduction from the 20% proposed in the first draft, over 40%. Even with that development proposal, over half of the borough would remain as Greenbelt, and that obviously has to sit in that context. It's one of the highest in Greater Manchester. We are proposing to remove some sites entirely and retain large parts of the Greenbelt on some of the sites that remain. We've talked about Walshaw, but there's also aspects of the Elton Reservoir and parts around the Simister site as well that have been removed. The selection of the sites remains a process derived by methodology. I won't go into all the detail of it, but it has been applied across the conurbation. And what it tries to do is release land where it is the most sustainable going forward. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's more sustainable in terms of the new infrastructure that we can deliver, particularly around roads, public transport, schools, and all of that is, of course, in line with national planning policy. There is 2 aspects of it. Obviously, we're releasing, the proposal is to release land for housing, but also for employment, the Northern Gateway being a large part of that. And obviously, that has to be taken account of for Bury's figures as well. There is a clear intention to rebalance the Greater Manchester economy so that the northern part of Greater Manchester can enjoy the benefits of potentially 25,000 new jobs, which would be on our doorstep and hopefully, undoubtedly really, benefiting the people of Bury. So, in terms of districts, Whitefield and Unsworth Township would see its Greenbelt reduced by 35%. However, if you take away the Northern Gateway aspect of that, it would only be 8%. So 8% for housing, the rest would be for the employment land in Whitefield and Unsworth. In Prestwich, it's 37%, and obviously that relates largely to the areas around Simister. But as has been mentioned previously, the village of Simister itself and the M62 motorway already sits in the green belt, and so there are large parts of this that are already developed on, and actually as part of the plans would be protected as open space and recreational space. Radcliffe is 11% reduction. Ramsbottom, Tottington and North Manor loses less than 1% of its green belt, and in certain cases in Bury East there is a net gain of 2%, and in Bury West a net gain of 6%. I know there's quite a lot of figures in there, and I'll happily share the answer by email to ensure that you get a full response. So hopefully you've managed to follow all the figures there. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor, do you have a supplementary question?
Madam Mayor, I do. I'd like to thank Councillor O'Brien for that full question. I've wrote all the answers down there. Andy Burnham, GM Mayor, assured us that the Greenbelt areas would be significantly reduced. I'm just wondering why this assurance didn't apply to the Prestwich and Whitefield area, with respect to the figures you just given me.
So, as I say, there have not been the type of reductions in those sites, broadly because of the Northern Gateway site, which obviously sits between Whitefield, Unsworth and Prestwich. Now, there have been some reductions in that site, and there have been some reductions in the Simister proposals, but the benefits of the Northern Gateway are really there to be taken for the likes of Bury, Rochdale and Oldham and our residents. So because of that policy objective of delivering the Northern Gateway, it does mean that we've not had the flexibility perhaps to reduce some of the Greenbelt loss there. However, the benefits of it will be shared by those townships, and we do hope to see those benefits come on board quickly. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Quinn to answer question 10 from Councillor Preston regarding to the iTree survey.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Thanks for your question, Councillor. Yeah, I can. The survey revealed that the most common species in Bury, English oak, hawthorn and sycamore. Ash make up 8% of the population, but ash are obviously under threat from Callara, which is ash dieback. The trees remove 5,120 tonnes of carbon a year. They also remove 70 tonnes of pollutants and soak up 137,810 cubic metres of water. The financial benefits of our trees are £2,807,270 per annum. The best species for carbon storage, pollution removal and water sequestration are English oak, sycamore and beech. Just a bit of information. The values are derived by taking exact measurements from a sample of the Buddha's trees, and the data fed through a sophisticated model which is processed by the US Forestry Service. Tree numbers also compare well with the audit that was carried out in 2010, and the financial benefit reflects the avoided cost in terms of carbon storage, particulate capture and processing of the surface water runoff. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor, do you have a supplementary? Thank you. I call on Councillor O'Brien to answer question 11 from Councillor Daly relating to GMSF and infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The GMSF and supporting documents identify a range of infrastructure that will be required to support the new development proposals. These include things around public transport, roads, cycleways, schools, healthcare and recreation provision. These requirements will be embedded within the statutory planning policies contained in the GMSF for each of the proposed development sites. The role of the GMSF is, of course, to establish the principles of development on land. As I previously mentioned, planning applications would still be required to determine the exact layout of individual sites. However, these planning applications will only be approved if they comply with the policy requirements, the planning conditions, and any legal agreements that will ensure they need to be implemented as part of a development. So effectively, we need a commitment in planning to the infrastructure before any application could be approved, despite what the GMSF may or may not release. It is too early to provide details of full costs of required infrastructure. Some of that will, of course, depend on the detail and timing of when developments come forward. On the question of who pays, there will continue to be, as there already are, national and sub-regional funding available to help provide a range of infrastructure projects. Some of these may or may not be secured at this current time. But of course, we do have policies across Greater Manchester, the Greater Manchester Infrastructure Framework and the 2040 Transport Delivery Plan, which provides much more detail on the approach to delivering a variety of infrastructure investments over the coming years. However, where there is not the agreed infrastructure in place, developers on the sites will have to provide infrastructure on the sites where necessary, and to ensure, therefore, that those sites will be compatible with the policies laid out in the GMSF. So, if there is no infrastructure, there will be no developments. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Daly, can you ask a supplementary question? And this will be the end of this part of the meeting. So this will be the final question, supplementary.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor O'Brien, for that very comprehensive answer. The last sentence answered the question. Does Councillor O'Brien agree that this council and the Mayor of Greater Manchester have sole responsibility for the production of a development plan, the GMSF, for Bury, and the housing projections contained within it? If that is the case, and Councillor O'Brien has already quoted the 2016 ONS figures, and that he believes those are reliable and robust, can just for once this council stand up for the interests of local residents, develop a backbone, and base household projections within the GMSF on the 2016 ONS projections, which would lead to no greenbelt loss, rather than the 2014 figures, which clearly he does not agree with?
Councillor O'Brien.
So the question was asked, are we responsible, solely responsible for those figures? Short answer is no.
The Council Constitution now allows each councillor to ask one verbal question on the work of the Cabinet since the date of the last council meeting, or on issues contained in the Leader's statement. There have been no Cabinet meetings since the last meeting of the Council. Therefore, questions must be confined to the issues only raised in the Leader's speech. There is no provision in the Constitution for supplementary questions, and we're all very conscious of time, so can I ask people to be as succinct as possible? Right. I don't think I'm going to have to choose a bit of a balance here. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Related to issues of homelessness and housing in the borough, and also indeed road infrastructure and development. I recall a number of months ago now, possibly around a year ago, I asked the Leader of the Council about discrepancies and differences in investment into 3 townships, namely over £3 million of investment in Radcliffe, over £2 million in Prestwich, and a measly £300,000 in Whitefield. The Leader again tonight has said that Radcliffe has been pledged over £3.5 million. Last time this was brought up, the Leader informed me that something was on the way for Whitefield. The only thing that has happened since then is the selling of council housing stock to a multinational corporation. My question to the Leader is, has any further work been planned since then? And will he tell us the nature of that work? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Kirsch. A huge amount of work has been done since then. In fact, work and meetings have taken place with council officers, with members, and briefings have been given to members of the Whitefield business community around the developments around the old Whitefield Town Hall site, the uplands. Great measures have been taken place to look to remove the restriction around development of that site. We are master planning in context those sites with other council-owned assets, looking at the potential, as I mentioned actually, relative to the answer I gave in relation to the Prestwich Town Centre challenge, having a health and well-being village. And I just asked Mr Patterson to come over and speak to me now, and we talk about the estimated economic value of that would be close to £45 million. So a huge amount of work has been done over the last year. What I would actually like to also just add on, because Councillor Kirsch has mentioned it in his question, I don't know where you hold your council surgeries. I think it's in McDonald's. I don't know. Yeah, you do. Okay, because McDonald's are very much in favour, as are Aldi, in terms of reconfiguring the site that we are talking about to improve the infrastructure there, which could include new traffic lights on what is a very dangerous piece of road, to create new jobs and increase new revenue. You know, we talk about growing the local business base and the local economy. I must say I'm slightly surprised, as are, I think, local business owners with the approach that you're taking on this. This could only be good for the local economy. The council has got best value for its asset. And when you talk about the moving or selling off of council homes, everyone who has been moved has been put in accommodation of almost exactly the same size. So we are working hard to grow the local economy. And, you know, as a Labour council, and Councillor Daly always trots it out, he even mentioned himself, more new business startups than anywhere else in Greater Manchester. We're going to continue to do that and do what's best for the long-term interests of this borough. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Hussain.
And thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be very, very brief. Madam Mayor, actually, Councillor Quinn alluded to this very important survey around the tree population in our borough. And this very important survey concluded that the net worth of the entire tree population in Bury is worth £4.6 billion, and that these trees maintain Bury's ecosystem, its wildlife and its natural habitat, and reduce pollution of all different kinds. Could the leader confirm how many trees will be lost in Bury as a result of the GMSF and as a result of the encroachment into our priceless greenbelt?
Madam Mayor, I certainly cannot confirm that exact figure in terms of how many trees could be lost in relation to the GMSF. What I can confirm, however, is that we're in negotiations with the Forestry Commission and neighbouring authorities to create the biggest urban forest in Europe. So I don't think there's going to be a net reduction in trees in Bury, and the million or so that you've mentioned, and that's an amazing figure when you come to think about it. I think you'll find over the lifetime of the GMSF, which is a 20-year plan, you'll have more trees than we began with. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Hickstone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to ask the leader a question about spatial framework and the air quality proposals, and it's what consideration was given, or what consideration will be given in the proposed new housing sites to air quality. Now, I'm thinking in particular of the two housing development sites, one in Bess's Ward, one in Hollywood Ward, which are the two quadrants of Simminster Island, which is a very air-polluted area. And so what consideration will be given to housing developments, given your commitment to want people to live in a safe house, how will we be looking into that issue?
Councillor Shorey.
I think it's a very fair point. As we know, the issue of air quality, particularly in terms of the areas that you're talking about and around Whitefield, talking about the south of the borough here, are adversely impacted, as we know, by issues relating to Highways England. Obviously, this plan is still at least, I would say, 2 years from coming into fruition. And at a Greater Manchester level, we're having negotiations with Highways England to ensure that we do have a joined-up approach to tackling air quality. And of course, I know you've got questions coming up in terms of questions to the joint authorities on that. But obviously, it will be a consideration, and either measures will be taken in relation to the development of these sites, if they are put forward in the final version of the plan, to mitigate the impacts on air quality. But I do think it is a valid consideration, and Any feedback like that should be fed into the consultation, because of course we want to hear it. We do have to tackle air quality, and it has to be done in a way which is sustainable and doesn't restrict future growth, both in terms of housing or the local economy. So it's a valid point and should be fed into the consultation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question's on the GMSF. The leader will recall the map of Ainsworth when, in the initial consultation that surrounded Ainsworth, which developers wanted to get their hands on, their land, completely changing the village into a town. Given that campaigners have said that they would prefer the sites to be elsewhere, do you agree with me that such a move by them and the Conservatives, I know the Conservative councillor for Radcliffe North has said that he opposes the current plan, do you think that that would absolutely jeopardise the Greenbelt land in Ainsworth and in Bradley Fold?
I'd ask Councillor O'Brien to answer this question.
Thank you, Councillor Walker, for your question. You've absolutely hit the nail on the head with this debate. If it can't be one place, it must be in another place. And I'm more than happy to see alternative proposals come forward from group opposites or whoever, individual councillors even, proposing where exactly in Bury they would like to see Greenbelt released in place of places being saved. I'm welcome to welcome that opportunity to see their plans and consider their proposals, as I'm sure Greater Manchester Combined Authority will do as well as part of their consultation. But you can't say you don't want it here and then expect somebody to find it somewhere else that has no impact in other areas of Bury. We've tried our best to shift as much as we can outside of Bury. Like I said, 2,000 units, a significant amount of our allocation already. And we're already maximising our brownfield sites. Only 4,500 can be accommodated on those. The rest has to be found on Greenbelt under the current figures. So if there are alternatives coming forward, they may suggest Ainsworth, they may suggest Hollands or Ramsbottom or Tottington. That is their right to do so, and we will look at each proposal. But we are where we are on the figures and the allocations at the moment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Are there any questions on perhaps any other topics given the time? Councillor Hodkinson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mine's also about the GMSF. Hot topic at the moment. Obviously, we're very pleased to see that the loss of Greenbelt in the revised GMSF has gone from 20% down to 12%, an 8% reduction. And I noted from tonight that Ramsbottom, Tottington and North Manor have lost just 1% of their Greenbelt, which is obviously much better than it was. Is he aware, is the leader aware, that there has been land redesignated within the borough as Greenbelt, which wasn't previously Greenbelt? And does he think that that land has been used to offset this loss at 8%? And is he also aware that land in Ramsbottom, we've got the church fields, which obviously has been designated as Greenbelt, the land on Ripon Hall, there's a planning application going through there at the moment, and if that goes through, there'll be a hotel in the middle of Greenbelt, providing the GMSF is agreed. Thank you.
I am aware, if that's your question, that additions have been proposed to the Greenbelt in Ramsbottom, and I'm sure you will be delighted about that. I'm sure you'll be delighted about that. Absolutely delighted that more Greenbelt is going over the moon. I can see you're delighted. Your car park must be doing well. So there are more additions to the Greenbelt than there would have been under this current proposal. So I think it's important to say that it is a proposal. And as Councillor O'Brien has just mentioned in his response to Councillor Walker, these are all proposals at the minute. So I don't think people should take triumphant stances about there being no Greenbelt release in their certain areas. What we've tried to put forward is a very comprehensive plan based on the stimuli from government in terms of housing numbers. But of course, when the Mayor of Greater Manchester talked about the radical rewrite, we wanted to ensure that land at the moment, which is green, does have additional protections to try and offset the overall loss. So of course that was the purpose of it. There is absolutely no hiding from the fact that we wanted to put Greenbelt, some land, back into the Greenbelt, which wasn't previously Greenbelt. But let's just be clear about this, and then I'll sit down. It's not just Ramsbottom. There's greenbelt, stuff being put into the greenbelt in places like Whitefield, Radcliffe, across the whole borough. But remember, one of the key things that we took into account when looking and identifying sites based on the Greater Manchester methodology is how easy would these sites be to be delivered? How could we get infrastructure to them, etc.? You all know as a Ramsbottom councillor and Ramsbottom businessman, there's only really 2 main roads that go up to the north of the borough. And some of these sites we're talking about quite huge development over a period of time, and that should be stressed, over a long period of time. But it was about what is deliverable, what is realistic, not simply have some there, etc. So that was the sort of formula behind it. But I'm pleased that you're so pleased, actually. And I'm pleased that there will potentially be more Greenbelt that wasn't Greenbelt prior to this plan. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
As it's now 9:45, can I, from the chair, ask for your agreement to end this section of questions and for the next item 7 to be sent to you in writing, which would be Councillor Quinn's report and the questions on the work of the Joint Authority.
Madam Mayor, it's about a minute long, if that.
Well, can I just ask for people's agreement for that? You happy with that? I think. Can I see all those in favour of my suggestion, please? Sorry. Item 8, notices of motion. Could I make members aware that copies of Procedure Rules 14.12, Point of Order, and 14.13, Personal Explanation, have been put around the chamber to assist you. With regard to 14.13, the rule exists to allow a member to interrupt the debate to correct a misstatement or misquote. A notice of motion concerning Bury becoming a plastic-free council has been received from the councillors listed in the summons, and I believe you've all been circulated with a revised form of wording, which includes some changes in red, which I'm sure the mover of the motion will explain to you. If you can all have sight of that copy, I call upon Councillor Thomas to move the motion. And please feel free to speak for less than 10 minutes if you can.
I'll do my best, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much. And before I move the motion, I'd just like to make an alteration with the consent of the meeting. The alteration is set out in red, as Madam Mayor has just said, in the updated motion and being put around the chamber. This slight change in wording would allow the councillor to formally move towards becoming a plastic-free community, should the motion be carried. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I'm happy to second that alteration, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, and I'll do it's a truncated version. I'll leave plenty out for everybody. I'll begin this address with a little confession. It's about plastic, but I've been telling hordes of young people over the last 20 years about the amazing properties of this group of materials that we know as plastics or polymers. Indeed, as a product design teacher, I've bent it, vacuum formed it, laminated it, laser cut it, 3D printed it, and I've taught hundreds of students over the years about the evolution of this material and how amazing it is. In fact, my A-level students, my former A-level students, will stop me in the street and still tell me now that, remember, sir, it's stronger than glass, it can prevent light damage, it can last for an eternity, it's flexible, it's a great insulator, it's odourless, it's durable, it's lightweight, it's moisture resistant, it's reusable. Okay? It's an amazing material. Quite simply, it's been the wonder material over the last 100 years. But it's been the victim of its own success. And we now need some checks and balances for the consequences of this material becoming ubiquitous. Plastic is a manufacturing byproduct of fossil fuels. We all know that. And we all know about the problems associated with that industry. Carbon emissions, global warming, air pollution, and not least the disastrous consequences to our animal habitats. We've known this for a long time, But I think the wake-up call has been the visible, tangible and measurable pollution that we've seen in our seas and waterways from single-use plastics. We've all seen the horrific images of seabirds and aquatic life being strangled by plastic, suffering from ingesting plastic, or starving because of their disrupted food chain. These images have been shocking to say the least, but they have cemented in people's minds the message that plastics overuse is a huge problem and we have to do something now. Consider these facts. I've got plenty, so I'll just read the worst of the lot. In 1950, the world's population of 2.5 billion produced 1.5 million tonnes of plastic. In 2016, we have 7 billion people, but we produce 320 million tonnes of plastic, and that's set to double again by 2034. Plastics consistently make up 60 to 90% of all marine debris studied. I'll talk about the stuff that's happening just in the UK and leave out some of the other shocking stuff, but 5,000 items of marine plastic pollution have been found per mile of beach in the UK, and 150 plastic bottles litter each mile of UK beaches. This is the real shocker. Recent studies in and around the UK have found that marine plastic pollution is in 100% of marine turtles. 100%. 59% of whales, 36% of seals, and 40% of seabirds. It's incredible. Now, the good news is, if we can have some good news, the good news is that research clearly shows that the proliferation of single-use plastic is consumer-driven. And that's brilliant, because collectively we're in charge. The consumers are in charge. If we stop using it, then the manufacturers will stop making it. Ramsbottom, I'm a councillor in Ramsbottom, has been a brilliant example of how, as consumers, we are beginning to understand these consequences and we're doing something about it. We have the first plastic-free shop in Greater Manchester, and I've worked with Abbey Sellers, its proprietor, and other volunteers and community groups in my ward to set up an environmental group called Plastic Free Rami. You might have heard of us. The group's priority is to gain plastic-free status for Ramsbottom. And this means that we'll have to persuade a range of businesses to commit to changing their culture of using single-use plastics, such as straws, bags and cups, and use alternative products that are more sustainable. Now, part of that status in Ramsbottom was being supported by Bury Council. But the motion that we're discussing here tonight will surpass those requirements. It will do so much more. If we can agree to pass this motion, our council will become plastic-free, and that's a powerful message to everybody that lives, works or visits Bury. We can really make a difference to a problem that is quite clearly on our doorstep, but it's also worldwide. If this motion goes ahead, I, for one, will be a proud elected member of a council that develops a plastic strategy that will compel our officers, buyers and suppliers to consider, wherever practically possible, sustainable alternatives to plastic. I'll be pleased that we'll commit to encouraging community groups to support this agenda with our Social Capital Fund and by incorporating its ethos into the Council's social value policy. I really hope everybody tonight can support this motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Is this your maiden speech? Can I?
It was, Madam Mayor, yes.
Congratulations on your maiden speech. Can I call on Councillor Leach to second the motion, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will speak now. Plastic pollution is one of the most severe environmental crises we face. And I'm supporting this motion because I think it represents a serious statement of intent, committing us as a council to put our money where our mouth is. It will raise awareness of the need to be responsible consumers, whether as shoppers, families, employees, providers and commissioners. By implementing this policy, we're saying to everyone in the borough and beyond, this is the way forward. And in this motion, we are supporting others in our community to do so too. We're all well aware of the environmental impact of discarded plastics. According to One Science website, plastic poses several environmental risks, including leaching chemicals and toxins into surrounding ecosystems, threatening the health of animal populations and releasing greenhouse gases into the air. Both terrestrial and aquatic animal species are at risk from harm, ingesting plastic waste, causing starvation, illness and death. Many of us will be familiar with the BBC TV series Blue Planet and the harrowing footage of microplastics leading to chemical contamination in large predators and of sea creatures entangled in our waste, including the hawksbill turtle caught up in a plastic sack. The series producer asserted that some scientists think that entanglement in marine plastics is the most significant welfare threat of human origin in the ocean. In some cases, it can also be a conservation threat to entire populations. And we, as a species, have done that. I, for one, find this a difficult fact to come to terms with. This crisis is down to human behaviour and the pursuit of progress and convenience. Not an intentional consequence, but nevertheless one that we have a liability for and must now endeavour to address. We have a responsibility of custodians of this planet to leave it in a better condition, to respect the rights of all other species to thrive and survive, not to suffer, choke on our rubbish and die because of our recklessness. They have no choice in this, but we do, and that's where we come in, because taking small steps can make a big difference. We have a responsibility as individuals and as part of this organisation to do whatever we can to address this crisis. History will not judge our generation kindly if we don't. We can all take those small steps. Some may think that acting as individuals doesn't have much of an impact. Oh, there's no point in me buying a reusable bottle, it won't make any difference, said 1 billion people. Is it really such a chore to make these micro changes when the alternatives are available? Buying reusable bottles and shopping bags, opting for plastic-free tea bags, requesting plastic-free goods from local supermarkets, not buying things that we don't need. And when we vote with our purses, you can be sure that manufacturers will hasten the use of environmentally friendly alternatives as the norm, and the price of these will eventually come down. It doesn't take much effort, it just takes a little thought and consumer power to make a massive difference. As custodians of this planet, it's incumbent on each and every one of us to act. And as a council, it's incumbent on us to lead the way, using everything that is within our gift, including purchaser power, to make an immediate difference and influence the use of alternatives. As a council, we are seeking to improve the world for those generations that follow us. It's the responsible thing to do. If we can effect some change to reduce the use of disposable and unnecessary plastics and influence others to do the same in order to address this pollution, that can only be a very good thing.
1 minute.
Thank you. This is a bold and aspirational policy, and I'm delighted to be supporting it tonight. And as it's an issue I feel very strongly about, I sincerely urge everyone in the chamber to do so too. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Are there any comments? Okay, I will take one comment from each party. As it's a Labour motion, I'll start with Councillor Pickstone, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I mean, we absolutely 100% support this motion and the principles behind it. I just wanted to refer exactly a year ago, well, actually a year ago tomorrow, this council unanimously, I think, agreed a notice of motion on reducing plastic waste, which had 5 very achievable resolutions that the council was undertake. And I seem to remember when you asked about those things, I can't remember whether it was the last meeting, Councillor Wright, the council actually hadn't got around to achieving those things. So all I would urge is that it's absolutely great that we say these very good principled things, but on a piece of paper alone they are meaningless. And what we need to do is actually take action. I mean, I always think, sometimes I drive into Prestwich and say, welcome to a fair trade town. There's a big Tesco's next, it's a load of rubbish. We need to actually, we need to, if we're going to have these good principles, we need to put our actions where our words are. So we absolutely support the motion, but I hope that it gets more action than the motion on plastic waste agreed a year ago did. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor, Our senior councillor has bowed to superior intelligence. Could I just be I will be very brief. I think I certainly will support this motion, and I think the rest of my colleagues will as well. This actually just gives me a chance to lead into where I was going to ask you for that Councillor Cathcart, who wasn't here, got his question in and didn't get his second in. I've got to say, Councillor Tarek, I know you're busy on your phone at the moment. Just if you can do it both at one time. Can I just say, the only problem I've got with this is item 3 is the £20,000. Now, I'm assuming when you say it'll come out of the Community Council Social Capital Fund, that'll be roughly £1,000 from each of the wards, roughly, because we get that figure allocated on tripartite, don't we?
Councillor Thomas will address that, not Councillor Tariq, as part of the motion.
So
if
so
you
my
want
question,
can you address that in your summing up, please?
Yes, thank you. So my question basically is, can we say we're going to give this money out ambitions to those parties who will support the plastic free? I've got to say, so far, my interrogation of the officers of this council over the last 4 weeks over where the money has gone from last year has resulted in a nil response. We've got no checks at all on where the money's going.
Can you stick to the point of the motion now, please?
The point is, Madam Mayor, I don't mind allocating the £20,000, but I'd like to know how, A, we're going to check the people who are going to ask for the money, and B, will there be better checks than we're having at the moment on how and where the money's spent and the results of that money being spent. That's basically it. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'll get back to the motion. Madam Mayor, this notice of motion builds on other motions passed by Bury Council. We were first councilling in to propose a deposit return scheme. We were
Oh, are you threatening me, Councillor Concern?
Yes, I am. You use language like that at me. He did a Jeremy Corbyn, madam, and whispered with respect.
I think you're the professional whispering. I'll take no lectures from you.
Can you both sit down? Councillor Quinn, can you please continue?
Thank you. We were the first council in England to propose a deposit return scheme. In that, we were supported by the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England and Surfers Against Sewage around the use of single-use plastic bottles and cans, and that was in 2017. This was supported by the Waste Authority in Greater Manchester, which then submitted this when DEFRA called for evidence on a nationwide deposit return scheme. We have, I'm glad you brought that up, Councillor Pixton, we have undertaken an audit. Sorry it took so long, but we don't have scarce officer time. So we have undertaken the audit on use of plastics within Bury Council. And we will look to ban harmful single plastics and use our influence to urge others to do the same. Madam Mayor, as the answer to question 18 states that we will work with United Utilities and the charity Refill to install public drinking fountains in Prestwich and Radcliffe to encourage people to fill their plastic bottles up at fountains instead of buying single-use bottled water. This is at no cost to the Bury. And the concept was that the combined authority has proposed Bury, namely Prestwich and Whitefield, as the initial trial area, and this has already expressed an interest to the combined authority in reducing single-use plastic. It also has a large student population and a diverse demographic. Madam Mayor, most of our plastic waste is what's called single-use plastic. That is example plastic bottles or packaging. In Greater Manchester, we only ask for plastic bottles in our blue bin because recycling is based on the market. Plastics like yoghurt pots, margarine tubs and plastic trays are low-grade plastic and the market does not want these. Other authorities may collect these low-grade plastics, but most of it ends up being incinerated in energy from waste plants. This is what we do in Greater Manchester at Runcorn. Plastic packaging, mostly pots, tubs and trays, can be confusing for the consumer. Some of it has the recycling sign on it, some of it now says it's biodegradable. Some packaging manufacturers are less than honest when they label their packaging in this way. When it goes into our blue bin, it contaminates the load, it's not recyclable, Madam Mayor. The UK has already banned the use of microplastics, that beads of plastic which are 5 millimetres or less in diameter, and it has put a charge on plastic carry bags. Madam Mayor, I always have a prop, you know that. The new English waste strategy, which should replace EU Directive 2020 and 2030 on waste management, or maybe it won't if we don't go out, goes further. And very importantly, it calls for a consultation on a number of things, such as a nationwide deposit return scheme, with a planned rollout in 2023 subject to consultation. It also calls for recycling plastics to be carried out in the UK, as some plastic waste exported from our country does end up via other countries in the oceans. The new English waste strategy invokes the polluter pays principle on the same lines as the deposit return scheme. The producers of the packaging will pay the full net cost of managing packaging waste at the end of life, and that's a direct quote from that document. Madam Mayor, DEFRA has called for a consultation on the strategy document. We in Bury, through the GM Combined Authorities, should scrutinise the document and give our opinions. Some proposals, Madam Mayor, may cause debate, like the call for separate waste streams for food and garden waste and curbside collection for batteries. Who would pay the extra cost? Who would pay for the extra bins? However, on the single-use bottles and packaging, the producers manufacture them, the supermarkets and shops sell them, but councils and us are expected to pay the full cost of recycling and disposal. We should support the polluter pays principle. In this way, I think Councillor Leach has already intimated this, the packaging manufacturers will quickly find more environmentally friendly alternatives or alternative materials. This has been proved the case when other countries have introduced a deposit return scheme, where the recycling rates are around 90 to 95%. In England, they're around 45%. In doing so, by consultation and supporting these proposals, we will create first a plastic-free Bury, a plastic-free plastic-free country, and help the environment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There is a bit of déjà vu all over again. We had nuclear free zone, Manchester and Bury, a member of nuclear free zone authority, probably still are, but nobody mentions it. But Christie's objected, and I objected to being nuclear free, and not just on defence, but on cures, treatment for illnesses, including myself. So I think you have to think this through. Power from burning waste. 1970s, as a councillor, I went to Rackhouse Estate in Manchester to look at using things like this to burn, to produce all the heating for the estate. And we were impressed with this and told we should repeat it in our councils. I think there are good uses for plastic. I'm not like Councillor Thomas, an expert on plastic, but Councillor Quinn says, when we say plastic free, we're not going to get rid of everything made of plastic. Now, if we're not, and the time scale for doing this is to me unrealistic, 3 years, it's going to be a plastic-free community. And within 7 years, that's within my lifetime, nothing is going to be used by using plastic. I've always seen plastic as a force for good. It's useful, it's clean, it's hygienic material. It's used in the health service, injections, needles. Sort of every week I see plastic used for good as a patient, bags of blood and so on. But I think plastic boxes compared with cardboard boxes used to get damp and wet in my childhood. I stored my football programmes in and then I would find they'd all gone damp a few years later. Now in plastic boxes they don't. We used to use plastic dustbins, corrugated metal, which men bent double carrying on their shoulders. Now we wheel lighter plastic bins. So all I'm saying is plastic has been a force for good, and time limits me giving other examples. I think there are problems with plastic, obviously. Disposal, use for power, and single-use plastic. And I'm not against environmental improvement, I assure you. I do think we've got a big job on with China. And India and Kyrgyzstan. The chap I was reading in the Sunday Times went there just recently and he found the British supermarket had found a way to get rid of all their plastic bags. They passed them to market stallholders in the capital, Bishkek, and they were giving them away free, not charging 5p or 10p, new bright yellow plastic bags with shop at Morrison's on. That's an attempt at humour. But all I would say to you is there are uses we can make of plastic. We can recycle. We can recycle them at plastic recycling plants where we don't go in for landfill, and we certainly don't fill the seas with plastic. I've been reading British Plastics Federation propaganda. I take what they say as true, and I think there are ways for us as consumers to still use plastic where appropriate, but then use it for fuel, for energy, and they set this out. If anybody let's look at their website. I've no shares in a plastic firm. I'm not involved with them, nothing to declare. But I was impressed by what they had written about this. They are clearly, as Councillor Quinn said, looking at what they can do about plastic, but I don't think we're going to get rid of plastic. Finally, if I have 1 minute, I was reading an article, I have a broad reading, not just the Sunday Times, this is in the Telegraph, and it's a chap who's explaining these filters to stop the particles of air pollution going up your nose. I think we all need these. And they're small plastic equipment. It's all described in the article on 5th of January. And they're gadgets to go up your nose to stop you getting polluted. It's an alternative to the Chinese mask.
Got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. And it's made of plastic. And it seems to be anti-pollution and to help people with their health, but it's made of plastic. So have a think about this one. I don't want to be seen as against trying to reduce plastic pollution, but I don't want to be plastic free. So I'll abstain, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
I think we should now move to the mover of the motion. The seconder has spoken. Can I ask if there are any amendments to the motion? Okay. Therefore, can I call on the mover of the motion, Councillor Thomas, to reply?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be very brief. Councillor Walker, I acknowledge all of what you've said. I think the difference might be that if we speak to my former students, that you and I might have a very different view to those in a different generation. I think that I've grown up using plastic and it's an amazing material, and I've looked at it for 20 years as a fantastic, unbelievable material. But I think the younger generation now realise that you know, it's gone too far and there have to be checks and balances. But I acknowledge everything that you said. I think really about the Social Capital Fund. I can't see how anybody could bemoan spending £20,000 of that Social Capital Fund on a cause like this. I can't see how. It doesn't matter to me what year it comes out. It doesn't matter when it comes out. I think everybody within our community would say, if we're going to look favourably on bids for a Social Capital Fund, this is what we should be doing with it. Okay? And obviously, £20,000 out of £600,000 is a fraction. Okay? I'd just like to say to my Liberal Democrat councillor colleagues, I know that you share the same values as I do, and I'm really pleased that you'll support the motion, and I definitely acknowledge the fact that you put this motion through 12 months ago. I'd just like to say really thank you to all those people who have already said they're going to support this motion, and I'd just like to finish by saying to envisage a society where we're responsible about how we use plastic involves, pardon the pun, influencing the fabric of society. And I think that's why we're here, and we're not just with this motion, but with all of the motions that we do. And I think that, you know, this really does send a powerful message across the whole of Greater Manchester if we can agree on this. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I also omitted to thank Councillor Leach for what was also her maiden speech. So lots of thank yous this evening. Can we now move to the vote? Can I see all those in favour of the motion, please? Thank you. Against? Any abstentions? 1 abstention. The motion.
I get that everywhere I go, Madam Mayor.
Just a question on timing. This meeting would be due to finish at 10:20 unless there is a motion, a suggestion put forward to suspend standing orders and continue longer. So before we get into the next motion, I wanted to say that. So a notice of motion concerning additional car parking Ramsbottom has been received from the councillors listed in the council summons. The details of the motion are set out in the summons. I call on Councillor Daly to move the motion. If you can try and do it in less than 10 minutes.
Madam Mayor, please can I move Standing Order 9.1 to allow for the business to be concluded, Madam Mayor. I'm conscious of the fact that there is a Labour amendment to this notice of motion, which, if we didn't extend it, yes, if we didn't extend it, then of course the motion would be carried as is, but of course we've amended this motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I'd like to second that, Madam Mayor.
We just vote on the principle of continuing the meeting, please. Yes, I'm confused by the word concluded. You mean... Yeah, so we can conclude the business. Yes. Yes. Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much. As Councillor Pickstone was saying, we had to have these motions in around the beginning of the year, 31st of January. I was obviously at midnight hard working on the Conservative motion. And when I was putting it together, I was thinking, one of the things that's going to happen as a result of this motion is immediately Labour Party policy is going to change. And immediately the Labour Party is going to follow the outline of the motion. And in my dreams, I was thinking that in the Bury Times 9 days later, that the exact proposal that put forward by Bury Conservatives would be announced by the Bury Labour Party. And all my dreams came true. Now, Madam Mayor, I don't believe for a second that the reason why the Labour Party announced the policy that they did in the Bury Times was anything to do with our motion. I don't believe it was anything to do with political advantage whatsoever. But you may conclude something different, Madam Mayor, I don't know. I was concerned, though, because the record of this Labour Council is that you need any decision certainly goes into years before anything happens. So how could a decision be made this quickly, specifically when the proposals outlined in the Bury Times article had not been addressed or even asked my Ramsbottom colleagues' opinion on that? Councillors Hodkinson and Schofield had not been asked anything in regard of that. And so it was rather interesting when I was hearing the comments earlier on regarding the fact that Theresa May won't speak to the opposition. Well, Bury Labour are the world champions of not speaking to the opposition, and this is clearly another example of that. At the very least, decency would suggest that if you are proposing to follow a Conservative policy which has been subject to discussions with the Council for 3 years, you would at least take the views and considerations of Ramsbottom councillors into consideration. But that's not how Bury Labour works. Bury Labour works for political advantage, not on behalf of the residents. And this is another example of that. So I was reassured, however, when I was provided with documentation to know that Councillor Shorey's record of taking at least 2 or 3 years to make any decision between the decision and policy coming into place was actually had some basis in reality. Councillors Hodkinson, ex-councillor Bevan, were in discussions with the ex-chief executive of this council going back to 2016. I quote from an email dated the September the 21st, 2016, directed to Mr Owen, the ex-chief executive, from Councillor Bevan at that time. Any progress on your side as regard funding opportunities following our meeting a few weeks ago? We would like to move this forward at the earliest opportunity. So what was Councillor Bevan talking about that he wanted to move forward? He was talking about plans. A survey had been carried out by Conservative councillors. Plans have been drawn up by, amongst others, the input of TFGM. So the exact thing that the Labour have now announced in the paper on the 9th of January on the internet was actually Conservative Party policy, and I dare say the intention of the council from at least 2016. So between 2016 and today's date, as ever with Labour, nothing ever happens. Nothing. We know that as an example. But we've got to this position today. Ramsbottom needs extra car parking. The hard work of Conservative councillors over many... Well, we can get onto the hard work of Ramsbottom's Labour councillor in a second if we want to discuss that. No, absolutely. The hard work of Conservative councillors has finally paid off. Rather than, because of the time limits, I'd just like to talk about one further point. We are in agreement regarding the site next to the leisure centre, but I think it's very important on the survey that Conservative councillors took part in going back a number of years, it was clear that that does not provide for enough car parking spaces to support the regeneration and economic growth of Ramsbottom, whilst also taking cars away from the congested streets in Ramsbottom. We must look at working closely with the trustees of the Mondi site to see whether there is the possibility. Well, Councillor Shorey rose his eyes at that, so clearly he's not interested in doing that. Doing something for residents Ramsbottom. Yeah.
You always are.
Councillor Shorey, can you
Sorry.
Can you allow Councillor Daly
keep saying the
to
same
continue?
thing. No, it's fine, Councillor Shorey, honestly. So what I would like is for the council, in this spirit of working together, which I know we're all in favour of, we all want cross-party cooperation as per the previous debates have gone into. Let's work together. Let's support council officers in the work of speaking to the owners of the Mondi site, and let's try and persuade and negotiate that more car parking can go on that site where it is clearly more appropriate to add to the proposal that's been put forward already. Thank you very much.
I call on Councillor Schofield to second the motion.
I'm happy to second that motion and reserve my right to speak.
Are there any comments? And I'm going to only take a few, and I want them to be brief, please. I think that's too many, so you'll have to talk amongst yourselves. I can't...
Madam Mayor, obviously the Labour Group is moving an amendment to this motion. Actually, the initial genesis of this came from Councillor Louise Fitzwalter. So yet again, Councillor Daly talks a lot, but doesn't really know the detail or understand what he's talking about. She led on this piece of work. The car parking strategy was put in place. That work has been ongoing, and given the additional focus of having a Labour councillor in Ramsbottom, Councillor Thomas has been leading on this work for the last year. So when we talk about people trying to steal credit for things, Councillor, I think the only thing you've ever delivered is a leaflet. But of course, now we'll come to our amendment. Thank you,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be brief. I'm just wondering, actually, there's a glaring omission in here. It says, and I'll quote, to address congestion and reduce the number of cars and other vehicles parked in residential streets. Now, we know the Tories love cars and they hate public transport. You can see where I'm going with this. You hate the buses, you hate the railways. You made a mess of both of them. So why? Well, that's a fact. That is a fact. That is a fact. Okay. So I'm not arguing with you, Councillor Jones, because we've got more important things to do. So why? You've got two bus operators and a much envied railway. So why have you not mentioned it in there? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, does anyone from the Liberal Democrats wish to make a comment on this motion? Please sit down, Councillor Quinn. I have a Labour amendment and I'm keen to get to that. Okay. Would the seconder like to speak now, please? You have reserved your right to speak, but you can speak now if you like.
use this one. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, our motion was to identify a site specifically for extra parking in Ramsbottom. A recent survey, town centre parking, was identified as... Use that one.
No, just turn it off.
Okay, both on. Can you hear me now? Yes, so Ramsbottom, extra parking. A recent survey of town centre parking identified the majority of available spaces in the town centre were occupied by 9 o'clock in the morning and remained occupied by the same vehicles until the end of the working day. This is frustrating for residents and visitors alike. Information from our survey, which included discussions with local businesses, revealed some of the reasons for our parking difficulties. And they included workers travelling in from other areas, parking and leaving the vehicles all day, hiking groups that park up and go off walking, car sharing groups that meet up in Ramsbottom and then travel on in one vehicle, and parking to catch the bus into Bury or Manchester. Parking in Ramsbottom Town Centre is free, and we believe this should continue. Free parking is seen as having a positive effect on local businesses, while the lack of available spaces has the opposite effect. Bury Council provide 149 car parking spaces in Ramsbottom Town Centre. When the new car park that's due to be planned for land off Porrick Way in Ramsbottom is up and running, these town centre spaces must surely be designated short stay. We believe parking provision is a customer service and is essential to the survival of towns like Ramsbottom. It's clear that town centres are changing. On the one hand, we need to be responsive to these changes as they emerge, and on the other hand, we have to plan ahead and manage the change, ensuring that parking does not become a barrier to attracting visitors. 200 spaces is a fantastic start. However, many residents are saying the old Monday paper mill site would be a better location to develop for town centre parking. But as I understand, the site isn't available at the moment, but may, at some time in the future, become available. Parking is the first consideration for many visitors to a town. If parking is not readily available, they will take the custom elsewhere. We don't want Ramsbottom losing out and missing opportunities because of the lack of parking. That is clear. But on a positive note, our new car park will have the potential to free up the town centre and will, as a result, benefit Ramsbottom residents and businesses for years to come. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. It's not your maiden speech as well, is it?
No.
Oh, good. Right. Just don't want to miss anyone out. Okay. Are there any amendments? There is an amendment.
Yes, Madam Mayor, amendment.
Are you moving the amendment,
I am
Councillor
moving the
Thomas?
amendment, yes. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to extol the virtues of Ramsbottom. It's fantastic nighttime economy, and the daytime economy is getting better, but obviously we need the parking to support that. But there's a consensus, so I don't think I'll bore you with that part of what I was going to say. I think what I'd just like to say is that it's interesting what Councillor Daly said, because I have been working on this every month. I've been having meetings, regeneration meetings. Every month I've been meeting officers. And if you go back 3 years, Councillor Leach, who was a candidate at the time, with Councillor Fitzwalter, conducted a consultation throughout Ramsbottom, and that parking strategy, I picked up the baton to make sure that we do something about it. I think what I'd like to say is to Councillor Daly's response is that it's interesting that we've had 3 Conservative councillors in Ramsbottom for 3 years, and nobody's ever, as far as I'm concerned, or aware of, I've been saying, let's have a new car park. No, since I've been at... Since I've been a councillor there, I haven't had anybody from the Conservative benches come to me and say, hey Kev, how about let's work together on a car parking strategy. So as far as I'm aware, that wasn't happening. So if we're talking about across benches, then really it's touche, isn't it? So Nevertheless, we're well on the way to having this car parking facility in Ramsbottom now. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Do we have a seconder for the amendment?
Very happy to second the amendment, and I would congratulate Councillor Thomas on this work. What this proposal is actually a realistic proposal to have a 600 space car parking site within the centre of Ramsbottom would require almost 15,000 square metres. So I don't know if you were suggesting some form of multi-storey car park, but obviously that isn't tangible. And the final point I make is we talk about consultation with Ramsbottom councillors. In fact, one of your councillors has had to leave the chamber because he can't participate in this debate because he's got a car park in Ramsbottom, Madam Mayor. So we've taken the long-term view, and I congratulate Kevin Thomas on his work. Thank you.
Do we have any comments?
Madam Mayor, yes. As a Ramsbottom resident and shopper, and it's very disingenuous to say that the Conservative councillors haven't been working on this for years. I know they have. Councillor Bevan, Hodgkinson and Councillor Schofield. And to say otherwise, I'm not saying you haven't, but do you know what? I wish we could get over this nastiness, Madam Mayor. Can we give credit where it's due? And I'd like to, as I say again, I'd like to thank my Ramsbottom councillors for all working hard on it.
Well said.
Any further comments? Okay. We've had the... Just check where we're up to. The second, we've done that, yeah. Right. As the mover of the amendment, do you have anything further to say at this point?
Nothing further to say, Madam Mayor.
Can I ask the mover of the original motion, if you have anything further to add at this point? Would you be prepared to accept the amendment, or...?
You see, Madam Mayor, one of the problems is that when you hear things that is just nonsense from the other side and is misrepresenting the involvement of one Conservative councillor. And I have papers upon papers and meetings upon meetings with senior officers of this council that Conservative councillors done over a number of years. It is absolute rubbish of the highest order and just typical of the Labour opposition to do that. I think Councillor Thomas, the idea... I would have assumed if we'd have been having all these meetings, perhaps he can share with us how many meetings he's had with the Executive Director of Regeneration, whose responsibility this has. Because I'm assuming if he's had all these meetings over all these months, he must have had at least, 6, 7, 8 meetings. If I were to suggest that the first time you spoke to the Director of Regeneration about this matter was after the Conservative motion was put forward, could you please tell me if that's correct or not?
Sorry, he's spoken, he's made all points. It's not a dialogue at this point, I'm afraid.
Madam Mayor.
Can I just say, I just want to make one point from the Chair. We are talking about the interests of Ramsbottom here, so it doesn't really matter whose bright idea it was if we can actually get new car parking out of this. So, I don't normally speak from the Chair, but I just feel it would be helpful to move on.
You are correct. The interests of residents of Ramsbottom are served, but we require further investigation of the Monday site, which is not within this motion. Thank you.
Okay. This motion, as it stands, does not exclude that. It does not mean that can't happen at some other point.
Point of order 1413, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to say there are minutes to prove that I've had meetings going back until May last year. So if I can, with David Fowler and a regeneration team, I'm quite happy to furnish Councillor Daly with evidence of those. Thank you.
Thank you. What point is this?
Madam Mayor, it's just regarding saying that this, it's directly regarding something that's just been said regarding the investigation of the Monday site. The amendment does say that acknowledges there is no land available to deliver this within the centre of Ramsbottom. There is no direct provision in here for future discussions about the Monday paper mill site.
We're talking about an amendment at the moment. I mean, as I know very well, parking is an endless issue, and it goes on, and there can be other projects after this motion to look at some of the issues that have been raised. I am conscious that we are out of time. The mover of the amendment, you've said everything you need to say, have you, Councillor Daly? Can I therefore say, are there any further amendments? Okay, can we... I'm sorry, we need to vote on the amendment. Right. Can I see all those in favour of the amendment, please? All those against? Okay, maybe they're doing this in Westminster tonight. We got home. Are there any further amendments? Right. Can I therefore move to the substantive motion as amended? Can I see all those in favour, please? Any abstentions? Okay. Where are we up to? There are no scrutiny review reports or items called in for debate. Item 11, questions on work of outside bodies or partnerships. There are no questions received under this item. Item 12, delegated decisions of council committees. There are no questions on the delegated decisions made by regulatory committees and scrutiny committees contained in Digest 4 2018-19. Members of the Council, that concludes the business before us this evening. Thank you very much for your cooperation. I declare this meeting closed.